She built his empire with her bare hands, bled for his crown, buried his enemies in silence, and he thanked her by believing the lies of the woman warming his bed. This is not a love story. This is a story about what happens when the most dangerous person in the kingdom is the one you threw away. Stay with me until the very end, because this betrayal gets worse than you can imagine. Drop a like right now, comment the name of your city, and let me know you're riding with me on this one. The rain had not stopped for 6 days when the messenger's horse collapsed at the northern gate. The animal went down hard on its front knees, foam pouring from its mouth in thick ropes, and the rider hit the mud with a sound like wet leather slapping stone. 2 gate sentries dragged him upright. His lips were cracked. His eyes were half shut and crusted with dust turned to paste. He held a sealed letter in his left hand, and he would not let go of it, not even when they pried at his fingers. "Get the queen," he said. "Not the king." "The queen." The taller sentry looked at the shorter one. The shorter one shrugged and said, "The queen is in the East Garden. You want me to interrupt her morning walk for a half-dead courier nobody sent for?" The messenger grabbed the sentry's wrist with a grip that did not belong to a man who had ridden 4 days without sleep. His voice dropped to something between a whisper and a growl. "If this letter does not reach Queen Evelyn before sundown, there will be no kingdom left to guard. Do you understand me? There will be nothing." They brought him water. They brought him inside the gatehouse and sat him on a bench near the fire. And then the shorter sentry went to find the queen because something in that man's voice had made the hair on his arms stand straight up, and he had been a soldier long enough to know when fear was real. Evelyn was not in the East Garden. She was standing in the corridor outside the king's private chamber, listening to a sound she had trained herself to endure without flinching. Laughter. Not his laughter alone. A woman's laughter tangled up in it, high and musical, the kind of laugh designed to make a man feel like the only person alive. Evelyn pressed her back against the cold stone wall and closed her eyes. She could smell jasmine oil seeping through the gap beneath the door. Celine's oil. Celine bathed in it. Celine wore it in her hair, on her wrists, between her collarbones, so that every room she entered smelled like her long after she left. It was a marking, a territory claim, and Evelyn understood it for exactly what it was, because she had not survived 15 years of court politics by being stupid. She opened her eyes when the sentry rounded the corner, breathing hard. He stopped short when he saw her. "Your Grace, there's a courier at the northern gate. He says the message is for you alone. He says it cannot wait." Evelyn studied the sentry's face. Young, nervous, sweating at the temples despite the cold draft that lived in this hallway like a permanent guest. "Did he say where he rode from?" "No, Your Grace. But his horse is dead, dropped right at the gate." Evelyn looked once more at the closed door. The laughter had stopped. Now there was only silence, which was somehow worse. She straightened her spine, adjusted the plain silver circlet on her head, the only crown she still wore since Alaric had given the jeweled one to Celine for some winter banquet 2 months ago, and walked past the sentry without another word. The throne room was empty at this hour. Evelyn crossed it alone, her footsteps echoing off the vaulted ceiling, past the twin rows of marble columns that Alaric's grandfather had hauled from the quarries of the south at the cost of 600 lives. She did not look at the throne. She had stopped looking at it months ago. It was just a chair now, a chair that belonged to a man she no longer recognized. The courier was sitting by the fire when she reached the gatehouse. He tried to stand. She put a hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down, gently but firmly. "Stay seated. You look like death warmed over and served cold." "What is your name?" "Harlan, Your Grace. I ride for Commander Aldrich of the Eastern March." Aldrich. The name hit her like a stone between the ribs. Aldrich had been her father's squire 30 years ago. He was one of the last military commanders who still sent reports directly to her instead of routing them through Celine's newly appointed council secretary. She had not heard from him in over 2 months. "Give me the letter, Harlan." He held it out. His hand trembled. Evelyn took the letter, broke the seal with her thumbnail, and unfolded it. She read it standing, with the fire behind her, and the 2 sentries watched her face change. It did not crumble. It did not twist with shock. It hardened. It went from flesh to iron in the space of 10 seconds, and the shorter sentry thought to himself, "That is the face of a woman who just learned something that will cost people their lives." Evelyn folded the letter. She tucked it into the inner pocket of her cloak. Harlan, how many people know you came here? Only Aldrich, your grace. He sent me on a route through the mountain passes. No main roads, no relay stations. Good. You're going to rest here until nightfall, and then you are going to leave through the western postern gate. You never arrived. This letter does not exist. Do both of you understand me? The sentries nodded. Harlan nodded. Evelyn looked at each of them in turn, measuring something behind her eyes that none of them could read. If anyone asks, I spent my morning in the East Garden, pulling weeds. That is the truth. That is the only truth. Say it back to me. You spent the morning in the East Garden, the taller sentry said, pulling weeds. Evelyn almost smiled. Almost. Then she turned and walked back toward the palace, and the rain kept falling, and the dead horse lay in the mud outside the gate, and nobody moved it for 3 hours because nobody wanted to be the one to explain why it was there. Alaric was eating when she found him. Not in the Great Hall, in Celine's private dining chamber on the 3rd floor of the West Tower, a room that had been a storage closet 6 months ago and was now draped in silk the color of crushed plums and lit by 40 candles that must have cost more than a foot soldier's yearly wages. Celine sat across from him, her dark hair loose over her shoulders, one hand resting on his forearm with the casual possessiveness of a woman who had already won and knew it. Evelyn stood in the doorway. She did not knock. Queens do not knock in their own palace. At least that was what she told herself, though lately the palace felt less like hers and more like hostile territory she was navigating on borrowed time. Alaric looked up. His face did something complicated. Guilt, annoyance, and a flicker of something that might have been the ghost of old affection, all fighting for control of his expression before settling on a kind of bland tolerance. Evelyn, we were not expecting you. We. Evelyn noted the word, filed it away in the part of her mind where she stored every small cruelty, every casual erasure, every moment that reminded her she was being replaced inch by inch. I need to speak with you, she said. In private. Celine's fingers tightened on Alaric's arm. Just slightly. Just enough. Surely whatever it is can wait, Celine said. Her voice was warm, honey poured over broken glass. We are in the middle of breakfast. Would you like to join us? I can have a 3rd plate brought. Evelyn looked at Celine. Their eyes met, and what passed between them was not the polite friction of 2 women sharing space. It was the quiet, absolute understanding of 2 predators who had taken each other's measure and knew exactly what the other was capable of. Celine smiled. Evelyn did not. I need to speak with my husband, Evelyn said. The word landed like a slap, and everyone in the room felt it. About a matter concerning the Eastern March. Military intelligence. I would not interrupt your breakfast for anything less. Alaric wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked at Celine. Celine gave a tiny shrug, a gesture so perfectly crafted to communicate reluctant grace that Evelyn wanted to scream. Of course, Celine said, rising from her chair with the fluid elegance of a woman who had practiced every movement in front of a mirror until it looked effortless. I will be in the gallery. Take your time, my love. My love. Celine said it while looking directly at Evelyn. Then she glided past, trailing Jasmine, and the door closed behind her, and Evelyn was alone with the man she had married 21 years ago in a battlefield chapel with blood still drying on both their boots. Alaric leaned back in his chair. He crossed his arms. What is it, Evelyn? She pulled the letter from her cloak and placed it on the table between them. He stared at it, but did not pick it up. Commander Aldrich has been tracking unauthorized gold shipments leaving the royal treasury for the past 4 months, she said. 37 separate transfers. No official documentation, no council approval. The gold is being routed through 3 different merchant houses in the capital before disappearing into accounts in the free cities. Alaric's jaw tightened. He picked up the letter. Read it slowly. His eyes moved back and forth, and Evelyn watched his face for any sign that the information was landing. That the man she had once known, the sharp, ruthless, battle-tested king who had united 5 warring provinces by the age of 29, was still in there somewhere beneath the fog of infatuation. He set the letter down. Aldrich is old, he said. His eyes are not what they were. These numbers could mean anything. Treasury transfers happen every month for 100 different reasons. 37 undocumented transfers, Alaric. 37. With no paper trail. Who has access to the treasury seals besides you? He knew the answer. She could see that he knew it. It sat in his eyes like a stone at the bottom of a clear pond. But he would not say it. "I will look into it," he said. "When?" "When I have time. I have the Northern Trade Delegation arriving in 3 days and the military review next week. I cannot chase every rumor that crosses your desk. This is not a rumor. This is documented evidence from one of your most senior field commanders, a man who has served the crown for 30 years, a man who has always been more loyal to you than to me." There it was, the real thing underneath the dismissal, not distrust of the evidence, distrust of her. Eveline felt it hit her in the chest, a dull impact, like an old wound being struck again in the same place. "Everything is not a conspiracy against you, Alaric, and everything is not a crisis, Eveline. You see threats in every shadow. You always have. I see threats because they are real. I see them because I look. Because someone in this palace has to." His eyes hardened. He stood up from the table, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped to the register she remembered from the war, the voice he used to give orders that men obeyed without question, because the alternative was death. "You are my queen," he said. "You sit beside me at formal occasions. You attend council meetings when I invite you. But you do not run intelligence operations behind my back, and you do not summon me away from my private time to deliver accusations wrapped in paranoia. Aldrich reports to the military command structure. If he has concerns about the treasury, he can file them through proper channels. Not through you, proper channels." Eveline almost laughed. The proper channels now ran through Lord Castaigne, Celine's cousin, who had been appointed to the Treasury Council 4 months ago, despite having no financial experience beyond gambling away his family's estate. "Alaric, this conversation is over." He picked up the letter and held it out to her. "Take your letter. Go back to your garden. I will handle the treasury matter in my own time and in my own way." She took the letter. Their fingers did not touch. There had been a time years ago when he could not be in the same room with her without reaching for her hand, her waist, some part of her, as if physical contact was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Now there was a gap between them that might as well have been an ocean. Eveline turned to leave. She stopped at the door. "I hope you are right about her," she said quietly, "because if you are wrong, the cost will not be your pride. It will be the kingdom." She walked out before he could answer. In the hallway, she passed Celine, who was leaning against the wall as if she had been waiting there the entire time. Probably had her ear against the door. Celine looked at Eveline with an expression of patient, faintly amused sympathy, the way one might look at a dog that keeps returning to a master who no longer wants it. Eveline walked past without a word. She kept her spine straight. She kept her face blank. She kept walking until she reached her own chambers on the far side of the palace, the rooms that had once been the queen's official apartments, and were now a kind of exile, stripped of staff, furnished with whatever the household office deemed adequate for a queen who no longer mattered. She closed the door. She locked it. She pressed her forehead against the cold wood and stood there for a long time, breathing. The letter was still in her hand. She read it again by the light of the single candle on her writing desk. Aldrich's handwriting was cramped and slanted, the penmanship of a man who was more comfortable with a sword than a quill. The numbers were damning, the routes were specific, the merchant houses were named, and at the bottom, in a line that Aldrich had underlined twice, a single sentence that made Eveline's blood run cold. 3 of the 5 garrison commanders along the northern border have received payments from the same accounts. Someone is buying the army, Your Grace, and they are not buying it for the king. She sat down at her desk. She pulled a fresh sheet of parchment toward her. She began to write. Not to Aldrich, not to any of the military commanders whose loyalty she still trusted. She wrote to a woman named Marin, who ran a trading house in the port city of Kalehold, a woman who was officially a merchant of fine textiles and unofficially the eyes and ears of a network that Eveline had built over 15 years, one careful relationship at a time, during the long campaigns when Alaric was away at war, and the kingdom needed someone to hold it together. She wrote in the cipher they had developed together, a system based on textile trade codes that would read to any interceptor, like a boring inventory request for silk bolts and dye shipments. When she finished, she sealed the letter with plain wax, no royal crest, no identifying marks, and placed it in a hidden compartment behind the loose stone in her fireplace. Tomorrow, she would find a way to get it out of the palace. Tonight, She would do what she had done every night for the past 6 months. She would lie in the dark in a bed that used to hold 2 people and was now too large for one. And she would think about the man sleeping 3 floors above her in another woman's arms. And she would not cry, because crying was a luxury she could no longer afford. The council met on the first day of each week in the great chamber behind the throne room. 20 chairs around an oak table that was old enough to have knife marks from 6 different reigns. When Evelyn had first taken her seat at this table, 20 years ago, the men around her had looked at her with open contempt. A woman, barely 22, sitting in a room where wars were planned and taxes levied and men's lives traded like grain futures. She had earned their respect the hard way, by being smarter than most of them and tougher than the rest. Now, when she walked in, the contempt was back. But it was different this time. Not the contempt of men who doubted a woman's capability. The contempt of men who smelled weakness, who sensed that her position was crumbling and were already calculating which side to stand on when it finally collapsed. Lord Castaigne was sitting in the chair that had belonged to the old Treasury Minister, a man named Wenthal, who had died of a sudden fever 3 months ago. Evelyn had liked Wenthal. He was honest to the point of being annoying, the kind of man who would argue for an hour over a discrepancy of 12 copper coins because the principle mattered more than the amount. His replacement was Celine's cousin, and the transition had been so smooth, so frictionless, that Evelyn could not help thinking it had been planned long before the old man's body was cold. Castaigne smiled at her when she sat down. It was the smile of a man holding cards he was not yet ready to show. "Your Grace, lovely morning, is it not?" Evelyn ignored him. She opened the leather folder in front of her and reviewed the council agenda. Military readiness, trade agreements, tax collection reports from the southern provinces. Nothing about the treasury discrepancies. Nothing about missing gold. Alaric arrived last, as he always did now. He took a seat at the head of the table, and the room fell silent with the particular quality of silence that belongs to men who are afraid of the person in charge, but not sure they should be. "Let us begin," Alaric said. "Lord Castaigne, the Treasury report." Castaigne stood. He was a tall man, thin in the way that suggested either discipline or illness, with a face that was handsome enough to be forgettable. He spoke for 20 minutes about revenue projections, tax yields, and infrastructure spending, and every number he cited was plausible, and every conclusion he drew was reasonable, and Evelyn sat there listening with the growing certainty that she was watching a master performance, not of governance, but of deception. When he finished, she spoke. "Lord Castaigne, what is the current balance of the strategic reserve?" The room shifted. Castaigne's smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes changed. A quick recalculation, like a card player adjusting to an unexpected bid. "The strategic reserve stands at 412,000 gold crowns, Your Grace, fully audited as of last month." "I see. And the audit was conducted by whom?" "By my office, of course. As is standard procedure." "As was standard procedure under Minister Wenthal, yes. But Wenthal used an independent verification team drawn from the merchant guilds. Are you continuing that practice?" Castaigne's smile thinned. "The independent verification was a courtesy, Your Grace, not a requirement. I found it inefficient and discontinued it, so the Treasury is now audited exclusively by the office that controls it, with no external oversight. I assure you, Your Grace, our internal processes are rigorous." "I am sure they are. But the Council might benefit from transparency. I would like to propose reinstating the independent audit with immediate effect." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Every man at that table understood what was happening. Every man was choosing sides without moving a muscle. Alaric spoke from the head of the table. "The Treasury audit procedures are a matter for the Treasury Minister to determine. Evelyn, this is not the time or place for procedural debates. Move on." She looked at him. He did not look back. He was studying the papers in front of him with the fixed concentration of a man avoiding someone's eyes. "Of course," she said. "My apologies for the disruption." Castaigne sat down. He was still smiling. And across the table, General Roth, the commander of the capital garrison, a man whose family had served the crown for 7 generations, caught Evelyn's eye and held it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked away. It was enough. That 2-second glance told her 3 things. Roth knew something was wrong. Roth was afraid. And Roth was not ready to act, not yet, not until he had more to go on than the intuition of a queen whose influence was evaporating by the day. After the council session, Eveline did not return to her chambers. She went to the palace kitchens, which at this hour were a roaring chaos of steam and shouting and the smell of bread and roasting meat. She found the head cook, a massive woman named Brigid, who had fed the royal household for 23 years and who feared nothing on earth except undercooked pastry. Brigid, I need a favor. Brigid looked at her with the shrewd, unsentimental affection of a woman who had known the queen since she was a bride too young for the weight being placed on her shoulders. Name it. Your supply wagons go to the harbor market every third morning, yes? Every third morning, rain or shine. What of it? I need a letter placed in the hands of Marin Thorne at the Kalehold Trading House. No one can know it came from me. Not the drivers, not the guards, not the kitchen staff. Can you manage that? Brigid wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron. She studied the queen's face for a long moment. Is it bad? It might be nothing, Eveline said. But you do not think it is nothing. No, I do not think it is nothing. Brigid held out her hand. Eveline placed the sealed letter in it. It disappeared into the folds of Brigid's apron with the efficiency of a woman who had been smuggling extra rations to underfed servant children for 2 decades and had never once been caught. Consider it done, Your Grace. And if you need anything else, a place to think where nobody looks for queens, my kitchen is always open. Eveline touched the older woman's arm. Thank you, Brigid. She left the kitchen through the service corridor and climbed the narrow back staircase that the servants used. The staircase was dark, lit by a single torch every 2 flights, and the stone steps were worn smooth by centuries of feet. She climbed all the way to the top of the east tower, to a small room that had once been an observatory and was now abandoned, its telescope broken, its ceiling leaking, its windows giving a clear view of the entire city spread below. She stood at the window and looked down at the capital. 60,000 souls, give or take. Markets and temples and slums and mansions and barracks and brothels, all tangled together like a living thing breathing smoke into the gray sky. She had protected this city. She had held it together during the siege of Blackmere, when Alaric was pinned down in the southern campaign and the enemy was 3 days from the gates. She had rationed the grain. She had organized the militia. She had stood on the walls herself, in armor that did not fit properly, with a sword she barely knew how to use because the people needed to see their queen standing where she said she would stand, and now she was being erased. Gently, methodically, the way you might remove a stain from expensive cloth, not with violence, but with patience, rubbing away at the fibers until the color faded and there was nothing left but a blank space where something used to be. She pressed her palms flat against the cold windowsill. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, with fury. The kind of fury that does not burn hot and fast but sits low in the gut like banked coals, steady and patient and waiting for oxygen. She heard footsteps on the stairs behind her. She turned, and her hand went to the small blade she kept strapped to her left forearm beneath her sleeve, a habit from the war years that she had never broken, because the war years had taught her that safety was a lie you told yourself to sleep at night. The footsteps stopped. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, wearing the plain brown cloak of a man who did not want to be noticed. General Roth. He stepped into the room and looked around, checking the corners, the shadows, the window. Old soldier's habit. Your Grace, I apologize for following you. I needed to speak with you away from the council. Then speak. Roth was quiet for a moment. He was a man who chose his words the way he chose his battles, carefully, with full awareness of the consequences. Wentall did not die of fever, he said. Eveline felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not literally, but something inside her, some last scaffolding of hope that she had been wrong, that this was all suspicion and paranoia and the bitter imagination of a woman scorned, that scaffolding collapsed, and what was left was bedrock. What killed him? I do not know yet, but I have spoken to his personal physician, a man named Corwin, who has since been reassigned to a garrison post 200 miles from the capital. Corwin told me that Wenthall's symptoms did not match any fever he had seen in 40 years of practice. He raised concerns. He was transferred within the week. By whose order? The transfer papers bear the seal of the Lord Chamberlain, but the Lord Chamberlain's office has been run by Celine's appointments for the past 8 months. The rain was picking up outside. Evelyn could hear it hammering the broken roof tiles above them. "What else?" she said. It was not a question. Roth reached inside his cloak and pulled out a folded document. He handed it to her. "This is a list of every senior military appointment made in the last 6 months. 17 new garrison commanders, 11 new cavalry officers, 4 new naval captains. Every single one of them has a direct financial or familial connection to either Lord Castaigne, Lady Celine, or the House of Varan, which, as you may know, is the ruling family of our former enemies in the Western Confederacy." Evelyn opened the document. She read the names. Some she recognized, most she did not. That was the point. New faces, loyal to new masters. "This is a coup," she said. The word came out flat and plain, like stating that water was wet. Roth nodded, slow, heavy, the nod of a man confirming the worst thing he had ever had to confirm. Not yet. But the pieces are being placed, and when it happens, it will happen fast. The Treasury Gold is buying the army. The new appointments are installing officers who will follow orders that do not come from the king. And the king is blind. The king is in love, Roth said, which amounts to the same thing. Evelyn folded the document and placed it inside her cloak, next to the space where Aldrich's letter had been. "Why come to me? Why not go to Alaric directly?" Roth looked at her with an expression that was almost sad. "Because I went to him 3 weeks ago. I presented my concerns about the military appointments. He told me I was undermining his authority. He told me that if I could not support his decisions, I should consider whether my position was still tenable. Those were his exact words. Your Grace, the king threatened to remove me for telling him the truth." Evelyn closed her eyes. "How much time do we have? Months, perhaps. Weeks, if something accelerates the timeline. The coronation anniversary ceremony is in 6 weeks. Every noble house in the kingdom will be in the capital. Every garrison will be at reduced strength because their commanders will be attending the celebration. If I were planning a seizure of power, that is when I would do it." The wind came through the broken window and guttered the non-existent candles. The room was getting dark. Below them, the city was lighting its evening fires, 10,000 small flames against the coming night. Evelyn opened her eyes. "I need names," she said. "Everyone you trust. Not everyone you think you trust. Everyone you would bet your life on. Can you do that? It will be a short list. Short lists are honest lists. Get it to me within 3 days. Not on paper. Memorize it and tell me face to face. We meet here, same time, same day." Roth straightened. He was looking at her the way men used to look at her during the siege, not with deference, but with the raw, uncomplicated recognition of someone who is going to keep them alive. "Your Grace, if they discover what we are doing, then we die," Evelyn said. "But we were always going to die, General. The only question that ever mattered was whether we die for something or for nothing." Roth held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned and descended the stairs, his footsteps fading into the dark. Evelyn stayed at the window. The rain ran down the glass in crooked rivers, distorting the city below into something unrecognizable. She reached beneath her sleeve and touched the blade strapped to her forearm. The leather was warm from her skin. The steel was cold. Somewhere above her, in a tower draped in silk and candlelight, the king was laughing again. She could hear it, faint and far away, carried on the wind like something already lost. And somewhere in the dark, in rooms she could not see and corridors she could not reach, the machine that would destroy everything she had built was turning, and the only person who could stop it was the woman the king had already thrown away. Evelyn leaned forward until her forehead touched the cold glass. 6 weeks, she whispered. Then she pushed away from the window, pulled her cloak tight around her shoulders, and walked down the stairs into the dark. The letter reached Marin Thorne on the 4th day, tucked between bolts of undyed linen in the back of a kitchen supply wagon that smelled like bacon grease and wet oak. Marin read it standing in the alley behind her trading house, with the harbor wind pulling at her coat and the sound of dock workers cursing somewhere below the seawall. She read it twice. Then she burned it in the flame of a tallow candle, ground the ash under her boot heel, and went inside to wake up her people. By nightfall, 6 riders had left Kalehold through 6 different gates, heading in 6 different directions, carrying messages that looked like trade invoices and read like death warrants if you knew the cipher. Marin stood on the roof of her trading house and watched the last rider disappear into the coastal fog. She was 51 years old. She had survived 2 plagues, 1 civil war, a husband who drank himself to death, and a business partner who tried to have her murdered over a shipping dispute. She had buried her only son at 16 when the conscription sweeps took him for Alaric's southern campaign and sent him back in a box that was too light to hold a whole body. She owed Alaric nothing. She owed the crown nothing. But she owed Evelyn everything. 20 years ago, when Marin was a nobody running a 2-room shop with debts she could not pay, the young queen had walked through her door unannounced and without escort, sat down on a crate of unspun wool, and said, "I am told you are the most stubborn woman in Kalehold. I need stubborn women. Are you interested?" That was how it started, not with grand speeches or patriotic appeals, with one woman recognizing something useful in another and making an offer that was equal parts opportunity and conspiracy. Evelyn had built her network the way she built everything, quietly, personally, with a patience that most people mistook for passivity. Marin pulled her coat tighter and went back inside. There was work to do, the kind of work that did not show up in ledgers or reports, the kind that happened in back rooms and harbor taverns and along roads that did not appear on official maps. The queen had called. The queen would be answered. Back in the capital, 3 days had passed since Evelyn's meeting with General Roth in the abandoned observatory. 3 days of performing normalcy, attending meals she did not taste, walking gardens she did not see, sitting through council sessions where every word out of Castaigne's mouth was a polished lie wrapped in a budget projection. She was getting thinner. She could feel it in the way her rings sat loose on her fingers, in the sharpness of her collarbones when she dressed in the morning. Not because she was not eating, because her body was burning fuel it did not have, running on a kind of low-grade terror that never fully shut off, even in sleep. Her jaw ached from clenching. The muscles across her shoulders felt like rope pulled to the point just before breaking. On the 3rd night, she woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps outside her chamber door. Not the heavy tread of a guard making rounds. Light steps. Deliberate. Someone pausing. Moving on. She lay in the dark with her hand on the blade under her pillow and listened to the silence that came after. Her heartbeat was steady. She noticed that about herself with a kind of detached curiosity, that her body had adapted to threat the way some animals adapt to cold, not by fighting it, but by lowering everything to a survival minimum, conserving heat, conserving energy, conserving the capacity for explosive action until the moment it was needed. Sleep did not return. She rose before dawn, dressed in the dark, and went to the one place in the palace where she could still think without feeling watched, the archive. 3 floors below ground level, behind a door that required a key only 4 people possessed. Evelyn had made sure she was one of them years ago, back when nobody cared who went in and out of a room full of dusty records. The archive held every official document the kingdom had produced for the last 200 years. Land deeds, military commissions, trade agreements, treasury reports, census records, judicial proceedings. It was the skeleton of the empire, stripped of flesh, and if you knew how to read bones, it could tell you things the living would rather keep hidden. She lit a single lamp and began pulling ledgers. 4 hours later, her fingers were black with old ink, and her back ached from hunching over a desk built for a man twice her size. But she had what she needed. Or rather, she had the outline of what she needed, the negative space where the truth should have been. The treasury records for the past 8 months had been rewritten, not clumsily, not with obvious erasures or clumsy forgeries, with the meticulous care of someone who understood that the best way to hide a theft was not to remove the evidence, but to replace it with evidence of something that never happened. Expenditures that matched revenue projections too perfectly. Disbursement records that cited projects she could not verify. Payroll figures for garrison troops that did not align with the actual troop counts Aldrich had sent her. Someone had rebuilt the books from the ground up. And the only person with the access, the authority, and the motive to do it was sitting in Minister Wenthal's old chair, smiling his forgettable smile, reporting numbers that the king accepted without question, because questioning them would mean questioning Celine. Evelyn sat back in her chair. The lamp flame guttered and steadied. Somewhere above her, the palace was waking up. She could hear the faint percussion of kitchen activity, doors opening, the distant rhythm of the changing guard. She was running out of time. Not because the coup was imminent, because her position was eroding daily, and each day that passed made it easier for Celine to isolate her completely. There would come a morning, soon, when the last door would close, the last ally would be reassigned or silenced, and Evelyn would find herself not just powerless but trapped, a prisoner in everything but name. The thought did not frighten her, it sharpened her. Fear was a luxury for people who still had the option of walking away, and Evelyn had passed that point so long ago she could not even remember what it looked like. What remained was something harder and less dramatic than courage, a stubborn, grinding refusal to be erased, rooted not in hope, but in the simple biological fact that she was still breathing and intended to continue. She gathered the ledgers she needed, replaced the rest, locked the archive, and climbed the stairs back to the surface. General Roth was waiting at the top, leaning against the wall in his plain brown cloak, looking like a man trying too hard to appear casual. "Not here," she said without breaking stride. He fell into step beside her, matching her pace. They walked in silence through the servants' corridor, past the laundry, past the root cellar, past the small courtyard where the stable boys exercised the horses in the early morning light. Evelyn led him through a side door into the old chapel annex, a stone room that had been converted into storage for broken furniture decades ago and smelled like dust and rotting wood. She closed the door. Roth pulled a chair off a stack and sat down heavily. He looked tired. The skin under his eyes was the color of bruised fruit. "Your list," she said. 8 names, he said. 3 in the capital garrison, 2 in the Northern Cavalry, 1 in the Harbor Guard, 1 in the Intelligence Ministry, 1 civilian. Tell me the civilian. A woman named Sarah Voss. She runs the Courier Guild. Every official message that enters or leaves the capital passes through her network. She is not political. She is practical. And she has been tracking irregularities in the message traffic for weeks, letters being rerouted, dispatches arriving with broken seals, entire correspondence chains disappearing. Evelyn filed the name. Can she be trusted to act or only to observe? She will act if she believes the threat is real and the plan is sound. She will not act on faith. Good. I do not need faith. I need competence. What about the Intelligence Ministry contact? A man named Doran Kyle, deputy to the minister. He was Wenthal's closest friend. He has been quietly gathering evidence of the Treasury manipulation on his own. He does not know about us. He does not know about Aldrich's letter. He is operating alone because he trusts no one. Bring him in. Carefully. Make sure he understands that if he is caught talking to you, both of you will be dead before the week is out. That is not a threat. That is the reality we are operating in. Roth nodded. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a folded paper. There is something else, he said. His voice had changed. Lower. Tighter. The voice of a man delivering news he wished he did not have. Evelyn took the paper, unfolded it. It was a duty roster for the Palace Guard, the unit responsible for securing the royal family's personal quarters. She scanned the names. Half the roster had been replaced in the last month. New names, soldiers transferred in from provincial garrisons, men with no history of palace service, no established loyalty to the crown. She looked up at Roth. These men report to Captain Halvard, he said. Halvard was promoted 6 weeks ago by direct order of the Lord Chamberlain. Celine's Lord Chamberlain. Yes. So the guard protecting my rooms, and the king's rooms, is now staffed by soldiers loyal to Celine's network. That is what I am telling you, Your Grace. Evelyn refolded the roster. Her hands were steady. Inside her chest, something cold and precise was recalibrating, the way a compass needle swings and settles when the magnetic field shifts. They are not just planning a coup, she said. They are building a cage, and we are already inside it. Roth leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. There is one more thing, and I need you to hear this without reacting, because I do not yet know if it is true. Say it. Doran Kyle, my contact in the Intelligence Ministry, he told me something he overheard 2 nights ago. He was working late. The minister's office is adjacent to a private meeting room that Celine has been using for evening councils. Doran heard voices through the wall. He could not make out every word, but he heard a name. Whose name? Lord Varon. Evelyn went very still. Not the stillness of shock, the stillness of a predator that has just caught a scent it recognizes. Lord Varon was not a court politician. He was not a noble. He was a warlord, The commander of the Western Confederacy's largest surviving army, a man who had fought against Alaric for 12 years and lost, and who had signed the peace treaty with the public grace of a diplomat and the private fury of a man who intended to collect on the debt at a later date. He controlled 40,000 professional soldiers, a fleet of war galleys, and a personal hatred for the empire that went back 3 generations. If Selene was in contact with Varen, this was not a palace coup. This was an invasion plan with the palace coup as its opening act. Tell me exactly what Doran heard. He heard Selene say, "The gates will be open." He heard someone, he thinks it was Castaigne, say, "The garrison commanders will stand down." And he heard the name Varen twice, in a context that suggested coordination, not conflict. Eveline pressed her thumbs against her closed eyelids. Spots of color bloomed in the dark. She counted her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She opened her eyes. "The coronation ceremony," she said. 4 weeks away now. Every noble in the kingdom inside the capital walls, the garrison at half strength, the palace guard already compromised, and Varen's army within striking distance if they begin moving under cover of the trade season traffic. Roth was watching her the way a man watches a surgeon working on a wound, with respect, with a certain amount of awe, and with the understanding that the next cut would determine whether the patient lived or died. "What do?" he said. "We do not panic. Panic is what gets you killed before the first sword is drawn. We build. Quietly. One piece at a time." She stood up and began pacing the small room, stepping over broken chair legs and stacked tabletops. "First, I need confirmation that Varen is moving troops. Aldrich's network in the Eastern March can see the western border crossings. I will get word to him. Second, I need Sarah Voss to start intercepting the rerouted message traffic. Not blocking it, copying it. I want to see every message Selene sends and receives. Third, Doran Kael needs to get closer to that meeting room. I want names, I want dates, I want specifics. And the king?" Eveline stopped pacing. She stood in a shaft of dusty light falling through a crack in the ceiling, and for a moment Roth saw something in her face that he had not seen before. Not anger, not determination, but grief. Raw and ugly and alive, the kind of grief you carry when someone you loved has become someone you cannot reach. "The king is lost to us," she said. "For now. Maybe permanently. I cannot make him see what he refuses to look at, and every attempt I make pushes him further into her arms. If I go to him with what we know, 2 things happen. He dismisses it, because admitting the truth means admitting he was a fool. And Selene learns we are watching, which means our people start dying. So we go around him. We build a defense he does not know about, to fight a war he does not believe is coming, to save a kingdom he is handing to his enemies one piece at a time." She stopped. She looked at Roth. "And if we succeed, if we hold the line and stop this, he will never forgive me for it, because saving him means proving he was wrong, and proving he was wrong means breaking whatever is left of what we were. I need you to understand that I know this. I am not doing this for him. I am doing this for the 60,000 people in this city who did not choose any of this and who will die in the streets if Varen's army comes through those gates." Roth stood up. He was a head taller than her, broad enough to fill a doorway. A man who had killed other men in close combat and carried the weight of those deaths in the permanent tension of his shoulders. He looked down at the queen, this woman who was half his size and twice his strength in every way that mattered, and he felt something shift in his chest. Not loyalty, because loyalty he already had. Something closer to conviction. The bedrock certainty that he was standing on the right side of what was coming. 3 days, he said. I will have Doran and Sarah ready. I will have the intelligence you need. 3 days. And Roth, if anything feels wrong, if you sense surveillance, if someone asks a question that does not fit, you disappear. You go to ground. You do not try to warn me. You save yourself and rebuild. I am replaceable. This network is not. With respect, Your Grace, you are wrong about that. But I will follow your orders. He left through the side door, and Eveline stood alone in the broken furniture room, surrounded by the wreckage of things that had once been useful and were now just taking up space. That evening, Selene hosted a dinner in the Great Hall. 40 guests, 8 courses. Music from a quartet of string players brought in from the southern provinces. It was the third such event this month, and each one was larger, more lavish, more obviously a display of who controlled the social machinery of the court. Evelyn attended because not attending would be noted, and because she needed to watch. She sat at the far end of the high table, 6 seats away from Alaric, separated from him by a carefully arranged buffer of minor nobles and visiting dignitaries. Celine sat at his right hand, the queen's traditional position, wearing a gown of deep crimson that caught the candlelight like liquid fire. She was magnificent. Even Eveline, who hated her with a precision that frightened her sometimes, could acknowledge that. Celine was beautiful in the way that a loaded weapon is beautiful. Perfectly designed, perfectly balanced, perfectly dangerous. Eveline ate without tasting. She drank water while everyone else drank wine. She watched. She watched Castaigne lean across the table to whisper something to General Theron, the newly appointed commander of the Western Approach. Theron nodded once, sharply. She watched a man she did not recognize, tall, dark-haired, with the weathered face and scarred hands of a professional soldier, approach Celine during the second course and bend close to her ear. Celine's expression did not change, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her wineglass for exactly 1 second before relaxing. She watched Alaric. He was laughing at something Celine had said, leaning toward her the way a plant leans towards sunlight, instinctive and helpless. His hand was on her back. His eyes were on her face. And for a moment, Eveline saw him not as the king, not as the man who had destroyed her, but as the boy she had married, 23 years old, covered in mud and blood, grinning at her across a campfire and saying, "When this war is over, I'm going to build you a palace with a garden on every floor, because you deserve something beautiful after all this ugliness." He had built the palace. He had even built the gardens. And then he had given them to someone else. Eveline set her fork down. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs under the table and focused on the pressure of bone against muscle, grounding herself in the physical, because the physical did not lie, and the physical did not grieve. After the third course, she excused herself. No one noticed. She walked the long corridor back toward her chambers, and the music from the great hall faded behind her like a conversation she was no longer part of. She did not make it to her rooms. At the junction where the east corridor met the north wing, she found Captain Halvard waiting. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and 2 of his new guardsmen flanking him, young men with flat eyes and the particular stillness of dogs waiting for a command. "Your Grace." Halvard pushed off the wall and stepped into her path, not blocking her exactly, but making it clear that passing him would require acknowledgement. "Captain, is there something you need?" "Just a routine matter, Your Grace." "The Lord Chamberlain has requested that all members of the royal household register their daily movements with the Palace Guard Office, for security purposes. A new protocol." "I was not informed of any new protocol. It was approved this morning, Your Grace, by the King's authority." Eveline looked at Halvard's face. He was young for a captain, late 20s, maybe 30, hard jaw, steady eyes, the kind of man who followed orders with mechanical precision and did not waste energy on questions. "And what exactly does this protocol require?" "Simply a record of where you go and when, Your Grace. An advance notice if you intend to leave the palace grounds." "I see. And does this protocol apply to Lady Celine as well?" Something flickered in Halvard's eyes. It came and went faster than a blink. "The protocol applies to all members of the royal household, Your Grace," which was not an answer. Eveline noted it and let it pass. "Of course, Captain. I will be happy to comply. You may record that I am currently walking from the Great Hall to my chambers. My projected arrival time is approximately 4 minutes from now. Will that be sufficient?" Halvard's jaw tightened. He was not stupid. He knew she was mocking him, but his orders did not include a response to mockery, so he simply nodded and stepped aside. Eveline walked past. She did not look back, but she could feel their eyes on her, 3 sets of them, tracking her down the corridor like a scope follows a moving target. When she reached her chambers, she locked the door, pulled the heavy curtain across the window, and sat down at her writing desk in the dark. The cage was closing. She had days, not weeks. The monitoring protocol was the second to last step. The last step would be an accusation, treason, conspiracy, something with enough weight to justify arrest. Celine was building a legal framework for elimination, constructing a story in which the queen was the traitor and the traitor was the hero, and by the time the story was finished, Eveline would be in a cell or in the ground, and no one would question it because the evidence would be perfect, fabricated with the same meticulous care that had rebuilt the treasury books. She pulled parchment toward her. She did not light a candle. She wrote in the dark, by feel and memory, the way she had written during the siege when light meant a target for enemy archers. 3 letters, 3 different routes, 3 different people. The first to Marin Thorn in Kalehold, the second to Commander Aldrich in the Eastern March, the third to a name she had not spoken aloud in 10 years, a woman who lived in the mountains north of the capital, who had no title, no army, and no official existence, but who knew more about the interior workings of the Western Confederacy than any spy the Empire had ever employed, because she had been born inside it. Evelyn finished writing. She sealed the letters with plain wax. She hid them in 3 different locations within her chambers, one behind the loose hearthstone, one inside the binding of a book she knew no one would open, one beneath the false bottom of a jewelry box that contained nothing of value. Tomorrow she would find ways to send them. Tonight she would sleep, or try to, with a blade under her pillow and her boots beside the bed. She lay down in the dark. The mattress was cold. The room was silent except for the wind pressing against the shutters, and the distant, nearly inaudible sound of the great hall. Music, laughter, the kingdom celebrating something that was already dead. Evelyn stared at the ceiling she could not see. "Alaric," she whispered, not to him, not to anyone, just to the dark and to the memory of a man who no longer existed. "What have you done to us?" She closed her eyes. Sleep did not come for a long time. When it did, she dreamed of fire. 2 days later, Doran Kyle was found dead in his quarters at the Intelligence Ministry. The official report said he had hanged himself. The rope was silk. The knot was professional. His personal papers had been removed before the body was discovered. General Roth brought the news to Evelyn in the observatory at dawn. His face was gray. His hands were fists at his sides. "They knew," he said. "Someone told them." Doran was getting too close, and they cut him out. Evelyn stood at the broken window. The city below was waking up, smoke rising from 10,000 chimneys, and from up here the morning looked ordinary, looked peaceful, looked like any other day in a kingdom that did not know it was being eaten alive from the inside. "Who else knows about us?" she said. "Nobody. I came to Doran alone. I used no intermediaries. But Doran may have kept notes. He may have written something down before they got to him. Then we assume the worst. We assume they have his notes. We assume they know someone is investigating. They do not know who, not yet. But they know that someone is asking questions, and they will start looking." Roth's fists tightened until the knuckles went white. "I should have moved faster. I should have brought him in sooner." Evelyn turned from the window. She looked at Roth, and what he saw in her face was not comfort. It was something colder and more useful than comfort. It was clarity. Doran Kyle is dead because the people we are fighting kill anyone who gets close to the truth. That is what they are. That is what we are dealing with. If you let guilt slow you down, if you let grief cloud your judgment, then Doran died for nothing, and we will be next. Mourn him later. Right now, I need you sharp." Roth exhaled, a long, ragged breath that carried the weight of a man who had just watched a friend die and was being asked to keep moving. "What do you need?" "I need Sarah Voss activated now." "Not in 3 days. Now." The timetable just moved. If they kill Doran, they are cleaning house, and that means the other pieces are almost in place. Get to Sarah today. Tell her everything. And tell her that if she wants proof that the threat is real, a good man is lying dead in the Intelligence Ministry, with a silk rope around his neck and his papers missing. Roth nodded. He turned to leave. "General," he stopped. Evelyn's voice was quiet, almost gentle, the gentleness of someone who understood exactly how much she was asking. "Be careful. I cannot afford to lose you." Roth looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked down the stairs, and the sound of his boots faded, and Evelyn was alone with the broken telescope and the wind and the certain knowledge that the game had just changed, and the pieces were moving faster than she could control. She gripped the windowsill. Her knuckles went white. She could feel her pulse in her temples, in her wrists, in the hollow of her throat. Her body knew what her mind was still processing, that the safety margin had just collapsed, that the distance between survival and destruction had narrowed to something she could measure in hours. She breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she had breathed before battles, before sieges, before every moment in her life when the world contracted to a single point, and the only thing that mattered was the next decision. She made it. She left the observatory and went to the kitchens. She found Bridget. "I need 3 letters sent today," she said. "Not through the supply wagons. The wagons are too slow and the routes may be watched. I need runners, people who can move fast and disappear." Bridget wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at the queen with eyes that missed nothing. "I know a boy," she said. "Name is Tam, 14 years old, fast as a river rat and twice as clever. He runs errands for the kitchen staff. Nobody notices him because nobody notices kitchen boys. He can carry 2 of your letters. For the 3rd, I know a washerwoman who leaves the palace every evening to tend her mother in the lower city. She has been making that walk for 9 years. The guards do not even check her basket anymore." Eveline reached into her cloak and pulled out the 3 sealed letters. The one with the mark in the corner goes to Kalehold. The one with the folded edge goes east. The 3rd goes north, to a woman named Isra in the mountain village of Thornfeld. "Bridget, if anything happens to these people because of what I'm asking them to carry." Bridget took the letters. She held them against her broad chest and looked at the queen with an expression that was part ferocity and part tenderness. "Do not finish that sentence, your grace. These are my people. I chose them because they are survivors, same as you, same as me. Now go back to being visible before someone notices you spend too much time in my kitchen." Eveline touched Bridget's hand, then she turned and walked back into the palace, into the light, into the performance of normalcy that was becoming harder to maintain with every passing hour. She spent the rest of the morning in the East Garden, visible, unhurried, pulling weeds with her bare hands in the thin sunlight. Anyone watching, and she was certain someone was, would see a queen engaged in the harmless, slightly pathetic hobby of a woman with too much time and too little purpose. Let them see that. Let them think that. Let them believe she was beaten and broken and fading into irrelevance. Because what they could not see, what nobody could see, was the network of letters and loyal people and carefully gathered intelligence that was spreading outward from this palace like roots beneath a forest floor, invisible, interconnected, and strong enough to hold the earth together when the surface finally cracked. She pulled a weed from the damp soil and shook the dirt from its roots. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. Inside her chest, the cold mechanism of survival was turning, calibrating, calculating distances and probabilities and acceptable losses. Somewhere to the east, Commander Aldrich was watching the border. Somewhere in Kalehold, Marin Thorn was counting soldiers. Somewhere in the mountains, a woman named Isra was about to receive a letter that would pull her back into a war she thought she had left behind. And somewhere above Eveline's head, in a tower that smelled of jasmine and treachery, the woman who intended to destroy this kingdom was smiling at the king, running her fingers through his hair, whispering whatever lies he needed to hear to keep his eyes closed and his hands still. Eveline drove her fingers into the soil and pulled another weed free. 4 weeks until the coronation ceremony, and one dead man in the intelligence ministry whose silence was screaming louder than any warning she could have given. She looked up at the tower window, just for a second, just long enough to see the curtain move. Someone was watching. Eveline looked back down at the dirt. She kept pulling weeds, and she kept breathing, steady and slow, while the ground beneath the kingdom shifted in ways that no one could see and no one could stop, and no one, not even the woman on her knees in the garden with soil under her fingernails and a blade strapped to her arm, could fully control. The 3rd letter never reached Thornfeld. Bridget's washerwoman made it as far as the lower city bridge before 2 men in unmarked cloaks stepped out of an alley and asked to see inside her basket. She panicked. She threw the basket into the river and ran. They caught her within 3 blocks. By midnight, she was in a cell beneath the palace. By morning, Halvard's guards had her name, her employer, and a description of the woman who had given her the letter. A queen, silver circlet, no jewels, cold hands. The cage had not just closed. It had locked. They came for Bridget first. 4 guards in palace livery entered the kitchens at dawn, while the bread was still rising and the fire pits were coughing their first smoke into the cold air. They did not announce themselves. They did not present a warrant. They walked past the scullery maids and the potboys and the morning cook who was elbow-deep in a vat of salted pork, and they took Bridget by both arms and lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. Even though she was a woman who could carry a side of beef on each shoulder and had once broken a man's nose with a cast iron ladle for putting his hands where they did not belong, Bridget did not scream. She did not fight. She looked over her shoulder at the youngest kitchen girl, a child of 12 named Pella, who was standing frozen with a bowl of eggs clutched to her chest, and she said, in a voice as steady as the stone floor beneath them, "Finish the bread, Pella. Do not let it overproof." Then they took her down. Eveline learned about it 40 minutes later when Pella appeared at her chamber door, shaking so badly that the silver tray she was carrying rattled like a snare drum. The girl had brought tea. Tea was the excuse. The reason was in her eyes, wide, wet, and terrified in the particular way of a child who has just seen the world prove that adults are not safe. Eveline pulled the girl inside, closed the door, knelt in front of her so their faces were level. "Tell me," Pella told her. "Every detail. The 4 guards. Bridget's calm. The direction they had taken her, down toward the lower levels, toward the cells that officially did not exist, because the palace officially did not imprison people without trial, even though everyone who had lived within these walls for more than a year knew exactly where those cells were and what happened inside them." Eveline listened. Her face did not move. Inside her, something was tearing, a slow rip along a seam she had thought was reinforced, the place where her control met her fury. Bridget. Bridget, who had smuggled letters and fed starving servant children and offered her kitchen as a sanctuary. Bridget, who had nothing to do with politics or power or any of the poison that was eating this kingdom alive, except that she had loved her queen enough to help when help was asked. Eveline put her hands on Pella's shoulders. "Listen to me. You are going to go back to the kitchen. You are going to finish the bread. You are going to act as though nothing has happened, because right now, acting normal is the bravest thing you can do. Can you be brave for me?" Pella nodded. A small, jerky nod. The nod of a child deciding to be older than she was. "Good girl. Go." Pella left. Eveline stood alone in her chamber. The tea sat untouched on the tray, steam curling into the cold air like a question nobody was asking. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. The pressure created spots of light in the darkness. She counted them, forced her breathing to slow, forced her heartbeat to match. The body was a machine, and machines could be governed, and governance was the only thing standing between her and the kind of mistake that would get more people killed. Think. Think clearly. Think like the woman who held this city together during a siege. Bridget was taken. Bridget knew about the letters. Bridget knew about Marin Thorne and Kylehold, knew about the kitchen supply wagon route, knew about the washerwoman. Under pressure, Bridget would hold. Eveline believed that the way she believed in gravity, as a fact beyond argument. But belief did not matter if they used the methods Eveline suspected they would use, because everyone breaks eventually. That was not weakness. That was biology. The human body has limits, and the people running those cells knew exactly where those limits were and how to reach them efficiently. She had hours, maybe less. She crossed the room to her writing desk, pulled open the drawer where she kept her personal seal, her correspondence files, a small leather pouch of emergency coins she had hidden months ago. She strapped the pouch to her thigh under her skirt. She checked the blade on her forearm. She pulled on her heaviest cloak, the one with the deep interior pockets. She was reaching for the door when someone knocked, not the tentative knock of a servant, not the brisk knock of a guard. A single rap, knuckle against wood, confident and unhurried. Eveline stepped back from the door. Her hand found the blade handle through her sleeve. "Who is there?" "A friend who is about to become very unfriendly if you do not open this door immediately, Your Grace." She knew the voice. Sarah Voss, the courier guildmaster. Roth's contact. A woman Eveline had never met face to face. She opened the door. Sarah Voss was not what she expected. Eveline had imagined someone hard, angular, built like a riding crop. The woman standing in her doorway was short, heavy-set, with a round face and the ruddy complexion of someone who spent most of her time outdoors. She looked like a baker's wife. She looked like the kind of woman you would trust to hold your baby while you tied your shoe. She did not look like someone who controlled the information arteries of an empire. That was, Eveline realized, exactly the point. Sarah stepped inside without being invited. She closed the door behind her and locked it. She was breathing fast. Not from fear, from exertion. She had been running. Roth sent me. We do not have time for introductions. Your cook is in the lower cells. They took her an hour ago. They also have the washerwoman. The washerwoman talked. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She nodded. Keep going. Halvard's men are mobilizing. I passed 2 squads on my way here, and they were not doing routine patrol. They were moving with purpose. Toward the north wing. Toward you. How long? Minutes. Maybe less. I use the servant passages, but they know those routes too. Your Grace, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Roth wanted to come himself, but I told him no. If Roth is seen near your chambers right now, they will arrest him on the spot, and then we lose our last military asset inside the capital. I came because nobody knows my face. I am a courier. I deliver messages. That is all anyone sees when they look at me. What message are you delivering? Sarah reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out. Evelyn took it, unfolded it. 3 lines in Roth's handwriting. Observatory compromised. They searched it this morning. Moved to secondary location, the old tannery on Mill Street. Sarah knows the way. Trust her. Go now. Evelyn read it once, committed it to memory. Dropped the paper into the fireplace coals. It caught, curled, blackened, vanished. Sarah was already at the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. There is a drainage grate behind the east chapel, she said. It connects to the old sewer system that runs under the palace walls. It exits near the river market. The grate has not been used in years, but I checked it yesterday. It opens. It is tight. You will get dirty. But it is the only way out that they are not watching. You checked it yesterday. Sarah looked at her. The round, friendly face was suddenly not friendly at all. It was the face of a woman who planned for catastrophe the way other people planned for dinner. Roth told me 3 days ago that there was a chance this would go bad fast. I am a courier, Your Grace. My entire life is contingency routes. I have mapped every way in and out of this palace that does not involve a guarded gate. Yesterday I was being cautious. Today I am being necessary. Footsteps in the corridor, heavy, multiple sets, coming closer. Sarah grabbed Evelyn's arm. Now, she said, right now. They moved. Sarah led, and Evelyn followed, through the chamber's side door into the narrow service hallway that connected the royal apartments to the chapel wing. The hallway was dim, lit by a single oil lamp at the far end, and their footsteps echoed off the stone in a way that made Evelyn's skin crawl, because echoes meant that anyone listening could track them by sound alone. Behind them, she heard the knock on her chamber door. Then the knock again, harder. Then the sound of a shoulder hitting wood. Sarah moved fast for a heavy woman. She navigated the service corridors with the confidence of someone who had memorized the layout not from maps, but from walking it, step by step, counting turns and measuring distances the way a blind person measures a room. Left at the linen closet, right at the junction, straight past the chapel's rear entrance, where the smell of candle wax and cold stone seeped through the walls. The drainage grate was exactly where Sarah had said it would be. A rusted iron square set into the floor behind a stack of discarded pews that had been leaning against the wall so long they had grown into the mortar. Sarah hauled 2 pews aside, revealing the grate. She knelt and pulled. It did not move. She braced her feet and pulled harder, and the metal screamed against stone, a sound that Evelyn felt in her teeth. The grate came free. Below was darkness and the smell of old water and something organic and rotten. Sarah looked up at her. I will not lie to you, Your Grace. It is unpleasant. Evelyn was already lowering herself into the hole. Her boots found a ledge. Then nothing. Then cold water up to her shins. The tunnel was narrow enough to touch both walls with her elbows, and the ceiling was low enough that she had to bend at the waist. Sarah dropped in behind her, pulling the grate back into position above them. Darkness swallowed everything. The only sound was water dripping and their own breathing. Follow the current, Sarah whispered. It flows toward the river. Keep your left hand on the wall. Do not stop, no matter what you step on. They moved through the dark. The water rose to Evelyn's knees, then her thighs. Things brushed against her legs that she did not think about because thinking about them would not help, and moving forward would. The smell was extraordinary, centuries of waste and rainwater and decay compressed into a tunnel, built before anyone alive was born. Her eyes adjusted to nothing because there was nothing to adjust to. The darkness was total and absolute, and she navigated by touch and by the sound of Sarah's breathing behind her. A queen crawling through a sewer. A year ago, the image would have been unthinkable. 6 months ago, it would have been humiliating. Now it was simply the next thing to survive, the next obstacle between here and the other side of this, and Evelyn had stopped measuring her life in dignity a long time ago. Dignity was a luxury, like crying, like sleeping through the night, like trusting the man she married. The tunnel branched. Sarah's hand found her shoulder in the dark. "Right," Sarah said. "Always right." The left branch dead ends under the old granary. They went right. The water began to recede. The ceiling lifted. A gray suggestion of light appeared ahead. Not sunlight, but the ambient glow of a covered exit, where the tunnel met a stone drainage channel that emptied into the river. They emerged into this gray morning behind a cluster of market stalls that were not yet open. Evelyn was soaked from the waist down, filthy, and shaking from the cold. She did not care. She was outside the walls. Sarah was already moving, leading her through the back alleys of the river market toward a district of warehouses and workshops that smelled like leather and chemicals. The old tannery on Mill Street was exactly what it sounded like. An abandoned building with boarded windows and a door that required a specific pattern of knocks that Sarah delivered without hesitation. The door opened. Roth was inside. He looked at Evelyn, dripping, mud-streaked, wild-eyed, and his face went through something complicated before settling on relief. "You made it. Barely." Evelyn pushed wet hair from her face. "They have Bridget. They have the washerwoman. They were coming for me. I know. I heard 20 minutes ago. Halvard's men are searching your chambers right now. By tonight, you will be formally accused of treason." The word landed in his room like a stone dropped into still water. Treason. The Queen accused of treason by the woman who was committing it. The symmetry was so perfect it was almost elegant, and Evelyn felt a surge of something that was not quite admiration but was close, a grudging recognition that Celine had built this trap with the kind of precision that only comes from genuine intelligence applied with absolute ruthlessness. "What evidence will they manufacture?" Evelyn asked. Roth pulled a chair from the corner and pushed it toward her. She sat. Water pooled beneath her on the dirt floor. "Castaigne has already prepared a dossier," Roth said. "I have a source inside his office, a junior clerk who owes me a debt. The dossier contains forged correspondence between you and Lord Varon, letters in which you allegedly offer to open the palace gates in exchange for a guarantee of your personal safety after Alaric is removed." Evelyn went very still. "They are using my own intelligence against me," she said. "Everything I uncovered about Celine's plan with Varon, the open gates, the garrison standing down, they have rewritten it with my name in place of hers. Yes, and the letters are convincing. They use samples of your handwriting from official correspondence to forge your hand. The cipher is different from yours, but close enough to fool anyone who is not an expert. And the only experts who would know the difference are either dead, arrested, or outside the capital. When will they present it to the king? Today. This afternoon. The council has been called for an emergency session at the fourth bell. Castaigne will present the evidence. Celine will be present, in tears, devastated by the discovery that the queen she tried so hard to befriend was plotting to destroy the kingdom. Evelyn sat in the chair in the abandoned tannery, soaked and filthy and shivering, and she felt something shift inside her. Not break. Shift. The way tectonic plates shift, massive, slow, irreversible, creating a new geography that will not resemble the old one. She had been operating as a queen, thinking like a queen, moving within the structures and protocols and expectations that defined what a queen could do and how a queen could fight. Playing by rules that her enemies had abandoned months ago while she was still trying to preserve something, the institution, the marriage, the fiction that the system could be made to work if she just found the right pressure point. That fiction died in this room, on this chair, in these wet clothes, with the taste of sewer water still in the back of her throat. She was not a queen anymore, she was a fugitive. And fugitives do not play by rules. Fugitives do not petition councils or file reports, or trust that the system will eventually recognize the truth. Fugitives survive. That is all they do. They survive, and they adapt, and they build from whatever wreckage is available, and they do not look back because looking back is a form of dying. Evelyn stood up from the chair. Water ran down her legs and pooled on the floor. She pulled the cloak off, wrung it out with both hands, put it back on. "Where is Sarah?" "Here." Sarah stepped out of the shadows by the door where she had been standing guard. "Still here. I need you to get a message to Marin Thorne in Kalehold. The kitchen wagon route is burned. Bridget is gone. You will need a new channel. I have 3. I anticipated the loss of your primary route and set up alternatives. One through the merchant caravans, one through the fishing fleet, one through a network of traveling performers who cross the borders without inspection. Evelyn looked at her. This woman she had met an hour ago, who had crawled through a sewer beside her, who had built contingency routes before being asked. Roth was right about you, Evelyn said. Roth is a competent judge of useful people. It is his only talent. From the corner, Roth made a sound that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. Evelyn turned to him. General, the 8 names on your list, how many can be mobilized within the capital without drawing attention? 3, Roth said. The others are in garrison posts outside the city. Getting word to them will take days. 3 is not enough. 3 is what we have. Then we need more. Evelyn began pacing the small room. The floorboards creaked under her boots. We need allies the palace does not expect. People outside the military chain of command, outside the noble houses, outside the structure that Celine has spent months infiltrating and corrupting. You are talking about civilians. I am talking about the city, 60,000 people. Most of them will do nothing because most people do nothing when the ground shifts beneath them. They wait, they hope, they tell themselves it will pass. But some of them will fight. The merchants whose trade has been disrupted by Castaigne's new tariffs. The guildmasters whose people have been conscripted into labor gangs for Celine's building projects. The families of soldiers who have been transferred or disappeared. Sarah stepped forward. The Courier Guild has contacts in every district. I know who is angry. I know who is afraid. I know who has lost people to the purges. I can put together a network within a week. We do not have a week. We have days. Evelyn stopped pacing. She looked at them both, the general and the courier, and she saw in their faces the thing she needed most. Not hope, not confidence, willingness. The bear stripped down willingness to walk into a situation they might not walk out of, because the alternative was standing still while everything they cared about was destroyed. This is what we are going to do, she said. We are going to let them have their triumph. Today, this afternoon, Castaigne will present his forged evidence. Alaric will believe it because Alaric needs to believe it, because the alternative is admitting that he has been manipulated by the woman he loves. I will be condemned in absentia. They will search the city for me. They will announce a reward. And every person in this kingdom will hear that Queen Evelyn is a traitor. Roth's face was tight. And then we use it. Right now, I am a queen without a throne, fighting a shadow war that nobody knows about. After today, I will be the most visible person in the kingdom. My face will be on every wall. My name will be in every conversation. And the people who know me, the people I have served for 20 years, the people I held this city together for during the siege, they will have to choose. Do they believe the woman who stood on the walls with them, or do they believe the woman who arrived in a perfumed carriage 2 years ago and started rearranging the furniture? You're gambling, Roth said. You're gambling that your reputation will outweigh manufactured evidence. I am gambling that truth is louder than paperwork, and I am gambling that Celine has overplayed her hand, that by accusing me so publicly, she has forced every person in this kingdom to take a position, and some of those positions will be on our side. And if they are not, then we lose, and this kingdom falls, and Varen's army marches through those gates, and everything we built dies. Evelyn's voice was flat. She was not being dramatic. She was stating outcomes the way a general states casualty projections, as numbers, as probabilities, as the arithmetic of war. But I did not crawl through a sewer today to lose, General. I crawled through a sewer to survive, and I intend to keep surviving until I have the leverage to do more than survive. Sarah was already on the door. I will start with the river district, she said, the fishermen and the dock workers. They have been hit hardest by the new tariffs. Their guildmaster, a woman named Kess, lost her brother to the military purges last month. She is angry. Angry is useful. Angry is what wins wars, Evelyn said. Go. Sarah went. The door closed behind her, and Evelyn and Roth were alone in the tannery. Through the boarded windows, the morning light was getting stronger. Somewhere in the city, a bell tolled the 3rd hour. 1 hour until the council session. 1 hour until Castaigne stood up with his forged letters and his rehearsed indignation and drove the final nail into the coffin of Queen Evelyn's official existence. Roth stood with his arms folded, watching her. Your Grace, there's one thing I need to say. Say it. If the king condemns you publicly, the garrison commanders loyal to us will be forced to make a choice. Follow the crown or follow you. That is not a choice most soldiers are prepared to make. It violates everything they have been trained to do. Loyalty to the crown is not an abstraction for these men. It is the foundation of their identity. Eveline looked at him. Then, they will need a reason to break it. A reason bigger than training, bigger than tradition, bigger than the comfortable fiction that the person wearing the crown deserves to wear it. And that reason is walking through those gates in 4 weeks with 40,000 soldiers and a grudge that goes back 3 generations. When Varen's army arrives, it will not matter who is loyal to the crown and who is not, because there will be no crown. There will be rubble and bodies and a city that used to be the heart of an empire. That is what I need you to help them understand. Roth uncrossed his arms. He looked at the floor for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were hard and clear and decided. I have spent my entire life serving the crown, he said. My father served it, his father before him. I have bled for it, killed for it, and buried friends because of it. And today I am going to commit treason against it, because the crown is wrong, and the queen who no longer wears it is right. That is a sentence I never thought I would say. I need you to know that I know what it cost. Eveline crossed the room. She stood in front of him. She was a foot shorter and 100 pounds lighter, and she looked up at him with an expression that carried the full weight of everything she had lost and everything she was about to risk. It costs everything, she said. That is the price, and we pay it, or we watch everything burn. The 4th bell rang. Across the city, in the great chamber behind the throne room, the emergency council session began. Eveline was not there, but she could see it as clearly as if she were standing in the room, because she knew these people, knew the architecture of their ambitions and their fears, and she could predict their movements the way a chess player predicts a board. Castaigne would stand. He would hold the forged letters. His voice would be steady, measured, reluctant, the voice of a man who takes no pleasure in delivering terrible news. He would present the correspondence. He would explain the cipher. He would connect the dots with the surgical precision of a man who had spent weeks rehearsing this moment. Celine would sit beside Alaric, her hand on his arm, her eyes glistening. She would say nothing for a long time, because silence was more devastating than words. When she finally spoke, it would be soft, trembling, devastated. I tried to see the good in her, she would say. I wanted to believe she was not capable of this. And Alaric would sit at the head of the table, and he would feel the world crack open beneath him, and he would reach for the only solid thing left. Celine's hand, Celine's certainty, Celine's version of reality. Because the alternative was free fall. And Alaric had never been good at free fall. He was a man built for solid ground, for clear enemies, for battles where you could see the other side and charge straight at them. Subtlety confused him. Complexity exhausted him. And Celine had understood that from the very first moment, had read him the way a locksmith reads a lock, had crafted herself into the key that fit perfectly. He would sign the warrant. He would condemn his wife. And he would tell himself it was justice, because the alternative, that he had been played, manipulated, hollowed out by a woman who never loved him, was a truth too large and too ugly to hold. Eveline stood in the tannery and felt all of this happening across the distance like tremors before an earthquake. She could not stop it. She had never been able to stop it. The machinery of this betrayal had been built long before she understood what it was, and by the time she saw the shape of it clearly, she was already inside it. Roth left at noon to contact his 3 loyal officers in the capital garrison. He would not return until nightfall. Eveline was alone. She sat on the floor of the tannery with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up to her chest. The room smelled like chemicals and old leather. Light came through the cracks in the boards in thin, sharp lines that moved across the floor as the sun shifted. She thought about Bridget in the cells below the palace. She thought about the washerwoman, whose name she had never learned, who was sitting in the dark because she had tried to carry a letter for her queen. She thought about Doran Kyle hanging from a silk rope. She thought about Wenthal, who had died because he counted coins honestly. The cost. The actual, human, breathing cost of this war that had not even begun yet. People she had touched were being destroyed one by one, and each one was a weight she would carry for the rest of her life, however long or short that turned out to be. She pressed her forehead against her knees and closed her eyes. The woman who had walked into this fight was not the woman who would walk out of it. She could feel that truth settling into her bones, heavy and permanent. The Evelyn who had stood in the corridor outside Alaric's chamber, listening to laughter and enduring it with quiet dignity, that woman was dead. The Evelyn who had petitioned the council and filed reports and tried to work within the system, dead. The Evelyn who had loved her husband with the stubborn, aching loyalty of someone who believed that love, given enough time and enough patience, could survive anything, dead. Dead and buried in a sewer tunnel beneath the palace, washed away with the filth. What remained was something she did not yet have a name for, something leaner and colder and more honest. A version of herself stripped of every comfortable fiction, every sentimental attachment, every belief that had made her who she was and now made her vulnerable. She lifted her head, opened her eyes. The thin lines of light had shifted. Afternoon was coming. She stood up, she pulled the blade from her forearm sheath and checked the edge. Sharp, clean. She slid it back. The city was out there. Her city. Not the king's, not Celine's, hers. She had bled for it. She had starved for it. She had stood on its walls with a sword she could barely lift and dared the enemy to come. The enemy had come. A different enemy, wearing silk instead of armor, carrying poison instead of a blade. But the mathematics were the same. Defend or die. Hold or fall. Stand or be erased. The door opened. Sarah slipped inside. Her face was flushed. She was carrying a canvas bag that clinked when she set it down. "Kess is in," she said. "The Fishermen's Guild. 47 armed men and women who can be on the streets within an hour of a signal. The Blacksmith's Guild is ready to supply weapons from their reserve stock. And the Night Watch commander in the River District, a man named Polk, who has served 30 years and was recently told his pension was being restructured, which is a polite way of saying stolen. He has 16 men who will follow his lead." Sarah dropped into a crouch and opened the canvas bag. Inside were rolled maps of the city, not the official ones that hung in the palace, but working maps, annotated in multiple hands, showing alleys and back routes and choke points and the locations of every guard post and checkpoint in the capital. Evelyn knelt beside her. She spread the first map on the floor. The city looked back at her. Every street, every bridge, every wall. She had walked these streets. She knew them the way she knew her own body, by feel and by memory, and by the particular ache of familiarity that comes from loving a place through all its seasons. "Show me the weak points," she said. Sarah began pointing. "Here, here, here." The western approach has minimal coverage since Celine transferred the regular garrison. The river gates are guarded by Halvard's new men, but they rotate in pairs, and the rotation leaves a 12-minute gap every 4 hours. The old market wall has 3 sections that are structurally compromised. One good push, and they come down. Evelyn studied the map. Her mind was doing something it had not done in months, running cleanly, without the static of grief or the drag of divided loyalty. The politics were gone. The marriage was gone. The careful, painful balancing act of being a queen who loved a king who was destroying her, gone. What remained was tactical, spatial, mathematical. "Sarah," she said, "when Varen's army moves, which route will they take?" Sarah pulled a second map. This one showed the kingdom's borders and the major roads connecting the capital to the western frontier. "The trade road through the Ashenmere Pass," Sarah said. "It is the fastest route for a large force. 3 weeks' march under normal conditions. 2 if they push. And Celine's plan relies on the coronation ceremony to draw the garrison commanders away from their posts." "Yes. But the ceremony is still 3.5 weeks away. If Varen is already moving, then either the timeline has accelerated or the ceremony was never the real trigger." Evelyn's finger traced the route on the map. "What if the accusation against me is the trigger? What if the chaos of a queen's arrest, a treason trial, a kingdom tearing itself apart over the question of who to believe? What if that is the distraction Celine needs to open the gates?" Sarah looked at her. The round face was very still. "Then we have less time than we thought." "We have no time." Evelyn stood up. "We are already in the endgame. Everything from this moment forward is reaction, not preparation. We react faster, we live. We react slower, we die." She crossed to the window and pressed her eye to the crack in the boards. The street outside was quiet. Afternoon light, a stray dog nosing through garbage. Ordinary life doing ordinary things while the world shifted beneath it. Get me Roth, she said. Get me Kess and Polk. Get me every person who has agreed to stand. Bring them here tonight. Not all at once, in small groups staggered through different routes. By morning, I need a command structure. I need communication lines. I need weapons distributed to every point we can hold. Sarah was already on her feet. Eveline turned from the window. And Sarah, one more thing. I need someone inside the palace. Someone who is still there, still trusted, still invisible. Someone who can get close enough to Alaric to see his face when the reality hits him. Because it will hit him. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But Celine will make a mistake. Or Alaric will see something he cannot unsee, and when that moment comes, I need someone there to catch him. Not for his sake, for ours. Because a broken king with an army is either our greatest weapon or our greatest threat, and I need to know which one he becomes before he knows it himself. Sarah nodded once. Then she was gone. Eveline stood alone in the tannery. The maps were spread on the floor around her like the scattered pieces of a puzzle that could only be solved with blood. She looked down at them, and she saw not paper and ink, but streets full of people who were counting on walls that would not hold, and guards who would not protect them, and a king who could not see the blade at his own throat. She knelt on the floor. She placed both hands flat on the map of the capital. Her palms covered the palace, the market, the river district, the walls. Her city. She spread her fingers. Her hands were dirty. Her nails were cracked. There was sewer grime under her knuckles and a bruise forming on her right wrist from where she had banged it against the tunnel wall in the dark. These hands. These damaged, filthy, shaking hands. These were the hands that would hold this city together, or fail trying. She closed her fingers into fists against the map. Outside, the afternoon light was failing. The shadows of the tannery grew longer. Somewhere in the palace, a warrant with her name on it was being sealed with the king's own signet ring, and the man she had loved for 21 years was signing away her life because a beautiful woman told him to. And somewhere to the west, if she was right, if the cold logic she had assembled from fragments and whispers and the silence where truth should have been was correct, 40,000 soldiers were already marching. The city did not know. The king did not know. The council did not know. Only the woman kneeling on the floor of an abandoned tannery knew. The woman without a title, without a crown, without a home. The woman they had thrown away. Eveline opened her fists. She placed her palms flat on the map one more time. Then she stood and began to plan the defense of a kingdom that had just declared her its enemy. The first scouts returned at midnight with blood on their horses and fear in their eyes. Sarah brought them to the tannery through the back alleys. 2 young riders from Aldrich's Eastern Network who had ridden west instead of east because the message they carried could not wait for proper channels. Varen's army had crossed the border 3 days ago, not the trade road through Ashenmere Pass. Eveline had been wrong about that, and the air sat in her stomach like swallowed glass. Varen had split his forces. 20,000 infantry on the trade road, moving slow, visible, deliberately obvious, a decoy column designed to draw the Empire's border garrisons into a defensive position along the western frontier. The real strike force, another 20,000, had swung north through the mountain passes that everyone said were impassable in early spring. Passes that would have been impassable if someone had not spent the last 6 months clearing them in secret, widening the trails, stockpiling supplies at relay points along the route. Someone with access to Imperial engineering maps. Someone who knew exactly which passes existed and which could be forced. Celine. The northern column was 12 days from the capital, maybe 10 if they pushed through the lowland forests without stopping. Eveline stood in the tannery surrounded by people who were looking at her the way drowning people look at dry land. Roth was there, his face gray in the lamplight. Sarah was there, her round cheeks hollowed by exhaustion. Kess, the fisherman's guildmaster, stood against the far wall, a tall woman with hands like anchor chain and a scar across her jaw from a knife fight she never talked about. Polk, the night watch commander, sat on an overturned barrel with his 16 men packed into the room behind him, filling the space with the smell of leather and sweat and the particular tension of men who have been told they might die soon. 10 days? Eveline said. That is what we have. 10 days before 40,000 soldiers arrive at the walls of a city whose gates will be opened from the inside by the woman sitting next to the king. Nobody spoke. The silence had texture, thick, heavy, the silence of people calculating odds they did not like. Roth broke it. The city garrison stands at 6,000. Half of those are Halvard's new appointments, loyal to Selene or at least bought by her gold. That leaves roughly 3,000 soldiers I can count on, assuming my 3 officers can bring their units over without triggering a premature response from Halvard. Kess spoke from the wall. My people had 50, maybe 60 fighters, dock workers and fishermen. They know how to swing a blade, and they are not afraid of blood, but they are not soldiers. Polk shifted on his barrel. 16 night watchmen. We patrol with short swords and crossbows. We know every street and rooftop in the river district. Good for ambush, bad for open battle. Evelyn did the math in her head. 3,000 garrison soldiers of uncertain reliability. 60 armed civilians, 16 watchmen, against 20,000 professional infantry supported by a palace coup that would open the gates and neutralize the command structure from within. The numbers did not work. She knew it. Everyone in this room knew it. The calculation was death, clean and simple, and no amount of courage or cleverness would change the fundamental arithmetic. But arithmetic was not the only thing that won battles. Evelyn had learned that during the siege of Blackmere, when 1,200 defenders held a wall against 8,000 for 19 days, not because they were stronger or better armed, but because the wall was the right place to fight, and the attackers had to come to them. And every hour of delay cost the attackers more than it cost the defenders. Defense is cheaper than attack. Geography is a weapon. Time is a weapon. And panic, the right panic, applied at the right moment, is the most devastating weapon of all. We do not fight their army, she said. Every eye in the room locked onto her. We cannot meet Varen in the field. We cannot hold the walls against a prolonged siege. We do not have the numbers, and we do not have the time. So we do not play that game. We play a different one. She knelt beside the map spread on the floor. Her finger found the palace. Selene's plan depends on 3 things happening in sequence. The gates open, the garrison stands down. Varen's forces enter the city without resistance. If any one of those 3 things fails, the entire plan collapses. Varen cannot take this city by force, not quickly, not without siege equipment, not through walls that were built to withstand armies twice his size. He needs the gates open. He needs the inside man. He needs Selene. So we take Selene, Roth said. No. Taking Selene now would alert Varen and trigger an immediate assault before we are ready. We need Selene to believe her plan is working right up until the moment it is not. Evelyn's finger traced the route from the northern passes to the capital. Varen's northern column will arrive at the city in 10 days. He will expect the gates open, the garrison compromised, and Selene in control of the palace. He will expect to march in unopposed. Instead, he will find the gates sealed, the garrison under our command, and his inside support neutralized. And he will find it too late to change course, because his supply lines are stretched through mountain passes that can be closed behind him. You want to trap him, Sarah said. I want to break him. There is a difference. Trapped men fight. Broken men surrender. And Varen's army breaks the moment his soldiers realize they have been marched into a box with no way out and no one coming to open the door. Roth was studying the map with the intensity of a man seeing his own death and trying to find an alternative. This depends on controlling the gates, he said. All of them, simultaneously. And it depends on neutralizing Halvard's guard before they can execute Selene's opening plan. That means moving against the palace guard, against soldiers wearing the king's own livery, without the king's knowledge or permission. Yes, that is treason, Your Grace. Not the manufactured kind. The real kind. Evelyn looked at him. Her eyes were steady. Her voice was steady. Nothing else about her was steady. Her pulse was running too fast. Her hands wanted to shake. And somewhere behind her sternum there was a vibration, like a plucked wire that would not stop. But the parts of her that other people could see were made of stone. I am already condemned for treason, she said. The warrant has my name on it. The king signed it. I am a dead woman walking unless we win this. So the word treason means nothing to me anymore. It is just a sound. What matters is whether we hold this city or whether we let it fall. Roth exhaled through his nose. A long, slow breath, the sound of a man stepping off a cliff. Tell me the plan, he said. She told them. All of it. She had been building it in her head since the afternoon, assembling pieces the way a mason assembles a wall, one stone at a time, each one load-bearing, each one dependent on the ones below and beside it. Roth's 3 loyal officers would begin quietly repositioning their units over the next 48 hours. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger Halvard's attention. Routine training exercises, barracks maintenance that required temporary relocation. The slow, boring, bureaucratic machinery of military logistics that nobody watched because it was too dull to be suspicious. Sarah's courier network would establish communication lines between Roth's officers, Kess's dock fighters, Polk's night watch, and a series of safe houses spread across the city. Each node in the network would know only its immediate contacts. No one person could compromise the entire structure. Kess would arm her people from the Blacksmith Guild's reserve stock and position them near the 3 main gates, River Gate, Market Gate, North Gate. Not to hold the gates against an army, to hold them for 30 minutes. 30 minutes was all Roth's soldiers would need to reach the gates and establish a proper defensive position. Polk's night watch would handle the palace. 16 men, moving through rooftops and service corridors they had patrolled for decades, targeting Halvard's guard posts one by one in the hour before Varen's expected arrival. Quiet work. Knife work. The kind of work that night watchmen understood because the dark was their territory, and they knew how to move through it without making a sound. And Evelyn would go back inside the palace. The room went still when she said it. Not the ordinary stillness of surprise, the deeper stillness of people who have just heard something that reshapes the ground they are standing on. Roth spoke first. Absolutely not. It is not a request, General. You are a condemned fugitive. There is an active warrant for your arrest. Halvard's men have your description on every gate. Walking back into that palace is walking into a death trap. Walking back into that palace is the only way to reach Alaric before Selene opens the gates. Alaric condemned you. He signed the warrant. He chose her. Evelyn felt those words land, each one a separate impact, like fists against a bruise that never healed. She absorbed them the way she had learned to absorb everything, by letting the pain pass through her instead of stopping it, by refusing to give it a surface to stick to. Yes, she said, he did all of those things, and he was wrong. And when Varen's army is at the gates and Selene drops the mask, and he realizes that the woman he destroyed was the only one trying to save him, he will have a choice to make. And I need to be there when he makes it, not because I trust him, not because I forgive him, because a king with an army, even a broken one, even a foolish one, is the difference between holding this city and losing it. Sarah was watching her from across the room. The courier's face was unreadable. How do you get in? Sarah asked. The same way I got out. The drainage tunnel behind the East Chapel. Halvard does not know about it. His men are new. They do not know the palace's bones the way I do. And once inside, I go to Alaric. I show him the truth. Not the letters, not the evidence, not the careful arguments I have been making for months while he refused to listen. I show him the army at his gates. I show him the woman beside him giving the order to open them. And then I let him decide what kind of king he is. Roth's jaw was clenched so tight, Evelyn could see the muscles jumping under his skin. And if he decides wrong, then I will have died trying, which is more than most people get. The room absorbed this. Kess pushed off the wall and crossed her arms. Polk rubbed his face with both hands. Sarah pulled a map toward her and began tracing routes with her fingertip. Roth stood like a man made of wood, staring at a point on the wall above Evelyn's head, fighting something internal that showed only in the rigid set of his shoulders. Evelyn let them sit with it. She did not rush them. She did not inspire them. She did not give a speech about duty or sacrifice or the greater good, because speeches were for people who needed to be convinced, and the people in this room did not need convincing. They needed time. A few seconds to measure the weight of what they were agreeing to and decide whether their spines could hold it. Kess spoke first. My people will hold the gates. You have my word. Polk spoke second. The palace guard will be dealt with. Quietly, professionally. Sarah spoke third. Communications will be in place by dawn. Every node, every route, every contingency. Roth spoke last. He unclenched his jaw. He looked at Evelyn with an expression that she would remember for the rest of her life. Not because it was dramatic or beautiful, but because it was the face of a man who had just accepted that he was going to do the hardest thing he had ever done, and that it was going to cost him everything, and that he was going to do it anyway. I will have 3,000 soldiers ready to move on your signal, he said, and I will personally command the unit that secures the north gate. If Varen comes through those walls, he comes through me. Evelyn nodded. There was nothing else to say. The plan was set. The pieces were in motion. What happened next would be determined not by strategy but by execution, by the speed of runners and the steadiness of hands, and the willingness of ordinary people to stand in front of something terrible and refuse to step aside. They dispersed before dawn, one by one, through different exits, into a city that was still sleeping, still ignorant, still dreaming the last dreams of a peace that had already ended. Evelyn stayed in the tannery. She sat on the floor with the map spread around her and the single lamp burning low. She studied the routes. She memorized the timing. She rehearsed the sequence in her head, gate teams in position by midnight, Polk's watchmen moving on the palace at the second bell, Roth's soldiers mobilizing at the third, her own entry through the drainage tunnel at the fourth. When the darkness was deepest and the guards were most tired, she ran through every scenario she could imagine. The ones where it worked, the ones where it fell apart, the ones where she reached Alaric too late, or Halvard discovered the infiltration early, or Varen arrived a day ahead of schedule, and the gates were not yet secure. Each failure mode had a contingency, and each contingency had a failure mode of its own. And at a certain point, the chain of possibilities became so long and so tangled that planning ceased to be useful, and the only thing left was the decision to go. She had made that decision. It lived in her now like a second heartbeat, steady and irrevocable. The days that followed moved with the strange, compressed quality of time before a catastrophe. Every hour felt like 3. Every conversation carried a weight that pressed against the words from underneath. Evelyn stayed in the tannery during daylight and moved through the city at night, visiting Sarah's network nodes, checking weapons caches, memorizing faces she might need to recognize in the dark. She slept in fragments. 2 hours here, 90 minutes there, her body taking what it needed in short, brutal bursts that left her groggy and sharp at the same time. A state of constant alertness that burned through her reserves like a fire working through dry timber. On the 7th day, Aldrich's second message arrived. Not by courier this time. By signal fire. 3 fires on the eastern ridge at sunset, visible from the tannery roof if you knew where to look. Sarah saw them. She came downstairs with her face tight. Aldrich confirms. Varen's northern column passed the river fork 2 days ago. They are moving faster than projected. 7 days out, maybe 6. 6 days. The schedule had just lost 3 days of margin. Evelyn recalculated. The gate teams needed to be in position sooner. Polk's operation on the palace guard had to move up. Everything had to compress, and compression meant risk, and risk meant the probability of someone making a mistake had just tripled. She adjusted the plan. She sent runners. She did not sleep that night. On the 9th day, 1 day before Varen's projected arrival, Evelyn went to the drainage tunnel. It was 2 in the morning. The city was dark. A thin rain was falling, the kind that gets into everything and makes the world feel smaller. Sarah walked with her as far as the river market, then stopped. I cannot go further without being seen, Sarah said. From here, you are alone. Evelyn looked at the woman who had crawled through a sewer with her, who had built a resistance network from nothing in 10 days, who had not slept more than 3 hours a night since this started, and showed no sign of stopping. Sarah, if this goes wrong, it will not go wrong. But if it does, Sarah's round face was hard in the rain. If it does, I will hold the communication lines until there is nothing left to communicate. And then I will make sure the city knows what happened. The real story, not the one Celine wrote. Evelyn reached out and gripped Sarah's forearm. The older woman gripped back. They held for 3 seconds. Then Evelyn turned and walked alone through the rain toward the palace walls. The drainage grate was where she had left it. She pulled it free, lowered herself in, and began the crawl through the dark. The water was higher this time. The rain had swollen the underground channels, and it reached her waist within minutes. Cold enough to steal her breath. She pushed forward anyway, one hand on the wall, boots slipping on the slick stone floor, the sound of her own breathing loud in the closed space. 20 minutes. 20 minutes of darkness and cold water, and the small, persistent voice in the back of her skull that said, this is where you die, this tunnel, this dark, this water, and nobody will find you, and nobody will know. She let the voice talk. She did not argue with it. She just kept moving, because the voice was not in charge. Her legs were in charge, and her legs had not stopped yet, and they would not stop until her heart did. She emerged behind the east chapel, gasping, soaked, shaking. The palace grounds were quiet, rain and darkness. The chapel wall was cold against her back as she pressed herself flat and waited, counting guards, timing patrols. Halvard's men moved in pairs. She had memorized their pattern from Polk's surveillance reports. 2 guards passed the chapel every 12 minutes on a circuit that took them around the east wing and back. She waited for them to pass, counted to 60, and moved. Across the courtyard, through the kitchen garden, past the well house. The servants' entrance to the north wing was locked, but the lock was old and Evelyn had carried a pick set since the war years. A thin leather roll of metal tools that lived in her boot and had saved her life 3 times before tonight. The lock opened in 40 seconds. She slipped inside and eased the door shut behind her. The north wing corridor was dark. She moved by memory, counting steps, touching walls, navigating the geography of a palace she had lived in for 20 years and knew better than anyone alive. Past the linen storage, past the servants' quarters, where she could hear snoring through thin walls. Up the back staircase, 1 flight, 2 flights. Her boots silent on the stone because she had wrapped them in cloth before entering the tunnel, a trick she had learned during the siege from a scout who had survived behind enemy lines for 11 days by never making a sound louder than a heartbeat. 3rd floor, the West Tower. Celine's wing. Evelyn stopped. She pressed her back against the wall and controlled her breathing. Her heart was hammering, not from exertion but from something more primal, the ancient recognition that she was deep inside hostile territory and the margin for error had narrowed to nothing. Every nerve in her body was firing. Her skin felt electric. The blade on her forearm was a line of cold pressure that grounded her in the physical, in the real, in the present moment, where the only thing that mattered was the next step and the step after that. She was not going to Celine's chambers. She was going to the king's. Alaric had moved into the West Tower months ago, into rooms adjacent to Celine's connected by a private door that the court pretended not to know about. Evelyn knew the layout. She knew which room he slept in, which side of the bed he favored, which direction the door opened. She knew that he slept lightly since the wars, that any sound louder than a whisper would bring him awake with his hand reaching for the sword he kept against the bedpost. She reached his door. She stood before it in the dark. Rain beat against the tower windows. Somewhere below, she could hear the faint rhythm of a patrol crossing the courtyard. She put her hand on the door handle. The metal was cold. She had imagined this moment 100 times in the last 10 days. What she would say, how she would say it. The words she had assembled and rearranged and polished until they were sharp enough to cut through 21 years of history and 6 months of lies and the vast, terrible distance between who they had been and who they had become. None of it mattered now. The rehearsed words were gone. What was left was something rawer and less controlled. The fundamental truth of a woman standing at the door of a man who had broken her, carrying information that could save his life or end hers, with no way of knowing which outcome waited on the other side. She turned the handle. The door opened. The room was dark. The fire had burned to coals. Alaric was asleep. She could see the shape of him in the bed, the rise and fall of his breathing, the outline of his arm thrown across the pillow where, in another life, her head used to rest. Celine was not there. Evelyn noted this, filed it. Celine's absence at 2 a.m, the night before the convergence of every plan she had spent months building. That absence meant something. Celine was somewhere else, doing something that could not wait until morning. Evelyn closed the door behind her. She crossed the room. She stood beside the bed and looked down at the man she had married. He looked older. Even in sleep, even in the forgiving dark, she could see it, the deepening lines around his eyes, the new gray at his temples, the slight hollowing of his cheeks that came from stress, the body processes even when the mind refuses to acknowledge it. He looked like a man being consumed from the inside, slowly, by something he could not name and would not examine. She reached down and placed her hand over his mouth. His eyes snapped open. His hand shot to the bedpost, found the sword handle, gripped it. His body went rigid, every muscle firing at once, the combat reflex of a man who had survived a dozen battles by waking faster than the person trying to kill him. Evelyn leaned close. Her face was inches from his. She could smell him, sleep and sweat and the faint ghost of jasmine that was not his but hers, Celine's, still clinging to his skin like a stain. "It is me," she whispered. "Do not shout. Do not reach for that sword." Listen. His eyes were wide. The whites showed all around the iris. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs through the mattress, a wild, trapped animal rhythm that matched her own. She took her hand away from his mouth. He did not shout. He did not reach for the sword. He stared at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Shock so total it erased everything else, stripped away the king and the husband and the man, and left only the naked, undefended human underneath. "How?" he said. His voice was a rasp. "How are you here?" "The same way I do everything, Alaric." While nobody was watching, he sat up. The blankets fell away. He was wearing a linen sleeping shirt, and in the faint glow of the coals she could see the old scar across his left shoulder. The one she had stitched closed herself 20 years ago in a field tent that smelled like blood and lamp oil, while he bit down on a leather strap, and neither of them cried. "You are condemned," he said. "There is a warrant. I signed it. You were plotting with Varen. The letters Castaigne showed me." "Castaigne showed you forgeries." Eveline's voice was low, flat, stripped of everything except the facts. "The letters were manufactured. My handwriting was copied from official correspondence. The cipher was fabricated. Castaigne built the dossier on Celine's orders to remove me before I could expose what they are actually doing." Alaric's face changed. The shock was still there, but something else was pushing through it. The first hairline crack in a wall he had built to protect himself from exactly this moment. "That is what you would say. That is exactly what someone guilty would say." "Yes, it is. And it is also what someone innocent would say. The difference is that I have proof and they have paper." "Alaric, Varen's army crossed the border 9 days ago, 20,000 infantry through the northern passes. They will be at the walls by tomorrow night." The room went silent. Not the silence of disbelief, the silence of a man hearing a sound he recognizes but cannot place. A sound from a nightmare, maybe, or from a memory he thought he had buried. "That is impossible," he said. "The northern passes are impassable in spring. They were cleared by engineers using imperial survey maps that only the palace has access to. Maps that were provided by someone inside this court, someone with the authority to requisition them without raising suspicion." Alaric's breathing had changed, faster, shallower. His hands were gripping the edge of the mattress hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "You are lying. You are desperate, and you are lying because you have nothing left." Evelyn reached into her cloak and pulled out a sheaf of papers, the intelligence Sarah's network had gathered over the past 10 days. Scout reports, intercepted messages, troop movement charts, Aldrich's latest dispatch, received by signal fire and transcribed. She placed them on the bed in front of him. "Read them," she said. "Read them and tell me I'm lying." He did not move. He stared at the papers as if they were something venomous. Then slowly, with the reluctant inevitability of a man stepping onto ice he knows will not hold, he picked up the first page. He read. She watched his face. She watched the wall crack wider, watched the light get in, watched the realization spread through him the way blood spreads through water, slowly at first, then all at once, unstoppable, changing the color of everything it touched. He read the second page, the third. His hands were trembling. A muscle in his jaw was jumping in a rhythm that had nothing to do with chewing or speaking and everything to do with the mechanical process of a man's certainty tearing itself apart. He looked up at her. His eyes were wet. Not crying. Worse than crying. The eyes of a man staring into a hole where the ground used to be. A hole he dug himself with his own hands, while the woman standing in front of him tried to warn him, and he refused to listen. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. A sound came from below. Both of them froze. A door opening, footsteps on the stairs. Light, quick, deliberate footsteps that Evelyn recognized because she had listened to them through closed doors and down long corridors for months. The rhythm of a woman who moved through the world as if she owned it. Celine was coming up the stairs. Alaric looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Alaric. 21 years of marriage compressed into a single glance that held everything. The love, the betrayal, the waste, the grief, and somewhere beneath all of it, the ghost of the people they had been before any of this. The boy and the girl in the battlefield chapel with blood on their boots, promising each other forever. The footsteps reached the landing. The door handle turned. Evelyn stepped back into the shadow behind the wardrobe. Alaric pulled the documents under the blankets. The door opened. Celine entered carrying a candle. She was dressed, not in night clothes, in a traveling cloak, dark, practical. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was flushed from exertion or excitement or both. She crossed to the bed. She set the candle on the nightstand. The light threw her shadow across the wall, enormous, wavering. "You are awake," she said. She sounded surprised, pleased. "Could not sleep," Alaric said. His voice was steady. Eveline, hidden in the shadow, felt something shift in her chest, a reluctant recognition that the man could still perform when it mattered, could still control his face and his voice when the stakes demanded it. The soldier was still in there, buried under everything else. Celine sat on the edge of the bed. She placed her hand on his chest. "I have news," she said. "Good news. The preparations for the ceremony are complete. Castaigne has confirmed the treasury allocation. The noble houses have all accepted their invitations. By this time next week, every person of consequence in this kingdom will be inside these walls." She smiled. It was the smile Eveline had seen across 100 dining tables, aimed at 100 useful people, calibrated to communicate warmth and trust, and the particular kind of intimacy that makes the recipient feel chosen. But from this angle, from the shadow behind the wardrobe, watching instead of receiving, the smile looked different. It looked like a door opening onto something empty. "That is wonderful," Alaric said. "There is one more thing." Celine's hand moved from his chest to his face. She touched his jaw, turned his head gently toward her. "I have received word from our allies in the West. They are eager to formalize the new trade agreement. They are sending a delegation, a large one. They should arrive within the day. A delegation." The word hung in the air. Eveline heard it from the shadows and felt her blood crystallize, felt the last fractional doubt evaporate like water on hot iron. A delegation. 20,000 soldiers reframed as a trade envoy. The final lie, delivered to the king's face on the last night before everything burned. Alaric was still. His hand beneath the blankets was resting on the documents Eveline had given him. She could see the tendons in his wrist, taut as bowstrings. "A large delegation," he said. "Very large, but there is nothing to worry about. Castaigne has arranged accommodations. Everything is in order." She leaned forward and kissed his forehead. The gesture was tender, proprietary, and so perfectly performed that Eveline had to close her eyes against it. Not from jealousy, but from the sheer vertigo of watching a lie that Total delivered with that much skill. "Get some rest," Celine said. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." She picked up her candle. She left. The door closed. Her footsteps faded down the stairs. The room was dark again. Eveline stepped out of the shadow. Alaric was sitting on the edge of the bed with the documents in his hands. His head was bowed. His shoulders were shaking, not with sobs, with the deep, tectonic tremor of a man whose entire understanding of his life had just been demolished in the space of 5 minutes. He did not look up when she approached. He spoke to the floor. "How long?" he said. Eveline stood in front of him. She did not touch him. She did not comfort him. Comfort was not what this moment required. This moment required truth, delivered without padding, because there was no time left for the gradual, merciful revelation she might have preferred. Since before she arrived at court, Eveline said, she was placed here, by Varon or by his agents. Every move she has made, the relationship with you, the isolation of your allies, the replacement of the military command, the treasury theft, Wenthal's death, all of it was preparation. You were not seduced, Alaric. You were invaded. He made a sound, low, guttural, animal, the sound of a man who has just been gutted and is looking down at what fell out. Eveline crouched in front of him. She was eye level now, close enough to see every line in his face, every broken capillary, every evidence of the damage that had been done to him by a woman who had studied him the way a hunter studies prey, learning the patterns, the vulnerabilities, the places where a well-aimed strike would bring the whole animal down. "I cannot give you time," she said. "I cannot give you space to process this. I cannot be gentle with you right now because there is an army coming and the woman who invited it is sleeping 30 feet from where you sit." Alaric, look at me. He looked up. His eyes were destroyed. There was no other word for it. Whatever structure had held his sense of himself together, king, lover, powerful man, man who made correct decisions, That structure had collapsed, and what she was looking at was the rubble. "I need you to choose," she said. "Right now. Tonight. I need you to decide whether you are the king who saves this city or the fool who let it fall. And I need the answer before Celine comes back up those stairs." Alaric stared at her. The woman he had thrown away. The woman he had condemned. The woman who had crawled through a sewer and a drainage tunnel and back into the place that tried to destroy her, carrying the truth he had refused to hear. His hand released the documents. They scattered on the floor between them like fallen leaves. He reached for the sword against the bedpost. His fingers closed around the handle, not with the desperate grab of a man in panic, with the slow, deliberate grip of a man remembering who he was before he forgot. "Tell me what to do," he said. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking. Through the tower window, the first gray suggestion of dawn was creeping over the eastern ridge where, 10 days ago, 3 signal fires had burned with a message that nobody in the palace had seen. Below them, in the corridors and courtyards and cellars of the palace, Halvard's guards were completing their final patrol before the shift change. In the city beyond the walls, Roth's soldiers were moving into position. Kess's dock fighters were checking weapons in the dark. Polk's night watchmen were climbing to their rooftops. And to the north, close enough now that the outriders could see the capital's walls, 20,000 soldiers were making their last camp before the assault, sharpening blades, checking armor, waiting for a gate to open and a kingdom to fall. Evelyn stood up. She looked down at the king sitting on the edge of his bed with a sword in his hand and the wreckage of his certainty scattered around his feet. She held out her hand. "Get up," she said. "We have work to do." He took her hand. His grip was rough, calloused, the hand of a man who had held swords longer than he had held anything else. Evelyn pulled him to his feet, and for a moment they stood face to face in the dark room with 21 years of wreckage between them and no time to sort through any of it. She let go first. "Armor," she said, "now. And not the ceremonial set. The field plate. The one you wore at Blackmere." Alaric moved to the wardrobe. His hands found the armor by feel, battered steel, dented at the left pauldron where a warhammer had glanced off his shoulder 12 years ago. The leather straps replaced twice, but the metal original, scarred and functional and honest in the way that things which have been tested are honest. He dressed in the dark, buckling plates with the automatic efficiency of a man who had done it 1,000 times. Evelyn watched the door. Her blade was in her hand now, unsheathed, held low against her thigh. The corridor beyond was still quiet, but quiet was not the same as safe, and she had learned the difference between those two words in ways that left marks. Alaric turned to her. He was armored. The sword was at his hip. In the faint light from the breaking clouds outside the window, he looked like what he was. A king dressed for war, standing in a room that smelled like another woman's perfume, about to fight a battle he should have seen coming 6 months ago. "Where is Celine now?" he asked. Evelyn shook her head. "I do not know. She left this room 20 minutes ago in a traveling cloak. She is not sleeping. She is executing. The gates." "Yes, the gates. We have people in position, but Celine has had months to prepare her sequence. She will have contingencies we have not anticipated. The only advantage we have is that she does not know you are awake, and she does not know I am here." Alaric's jaw tightened. She could see the muscles working under the stubble. He was processing, not the strategic information, which his military mind had already absorbed and categorized, but the personal devastation underneath it. The man was at war with the king, the heart was at war with the head, and there was no time for either battle to resolve because the real war was at the gates. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Your voice, your authority, your face. When Roth's soldiers move, they need to know the king is behind them, not the fugitive queen, not a rogue general. The king, wearing armor, giving orders, standing where they can see him. And Halvard's men? Some will turn when they see you, the ones who are following orders because they thought the orders came from the crown. The rest will fight. Halvard himself will fight. He is Celine's creature through and through." Alaric closed his eyes. "Open them." "I put Halvard in command. I signed the order. Every soldier he corrupted, every post he compromised, my signature is on all of it." "Yes, it is. And we can inventory your mistakes after the city is safe. Right now your mistakes are trying to open the gates for an invading army, and I need you to stop them." Something flickered across his face. Not anger. She had expected anger, had braced for the defensive fury of a man being told he was responsible for the catastrophe unfolding around him. But what she saw was not fury. It was recognition. The bleak, unflinching recognition of a man staring at the full scope of his failure and choosing not to look away. He nodded once. Lead. She led. Through the private corridor that connected the west tower to the main palace. Down the back staircase she had climbed an hour ago. Through the servants' wing, where the pre-dawn silence was beginning to thin as the first kitchen staff stirred behind closed doors. They moved fast and quiet. Eveline in front, blade drawn, checking corners. Alaric behind, his hand on his sword hilt, his armored boots wrapped in the same cloth she had used. She had torn strips from the bed linen before they left, and he had accepted them without question, because the soldier understood even when the king did not. They reached the ground floor. Eveline stopped at the junction where the servants' corridor met the main hall. She held up a hand, listened. Voices. Low, urgent, coming from the direction of the throne room. She could not make out words, but the rhythm was wrong, too fast, too clipped, the cadence of people executing a plan under time pressure. She turned to Alaric. The throne room, she whispered. Selene is coordinating from the throne room. His face changed. The throne room was the symbolic heart of the palace, the seat of his authority, the room where he had been crowned and where his father had been crowned and where, in some imagined future that would never arrive, his heir would have been crowned. Selene had chosen it deliberately. She was not just seizing power, she was claiming it, taking the physical space of authority as the first act of her new regime. Something hardened in Alaric's eyes. The wet, shattered look that had been there since Eveline showed him the documents was still present, but it was being compressed, forced down beneath something older and more dangerous, the cold, focused rage of a man who had been made a fool and was done being gentle about it. How many will she have with her? He asked. Halvard's personal guard. 12, maybe 15 men, plus Castaigne and whatever nobles she has brought into the final stage. She would not trust the full plan to anyone outside her inner circle. 15 men between us and the throne room. 15 men between us and the woman who is about to open your gates. Eveline's voice was steady. But we do not go through 15 men. We go around them. The throne room has a gallery entrance on the second level, the observation balcony the court uses during formal proceedings. It is never guarded because it is never used outside of ceremonies. From the gallery, we can see the entire room, and the room can see us. She held his gaze. You walk out onto that balcony, in armor, with a sword, and you give the order to stand down. That is the moment. That is the hinge. Everything turns on whether those soldiers look at you and see their king, or look at you and see a man who already lost. Alaric stared at her. The corridor was dark, the voices from the throne room were getting louder. And if they see a man who already lost, then I will be standing next to you, and they will see the woman who did not. They moved. Up the secondary staircase to the gallery level, through the narrow corridor that ran above the great hall, a passage built for servants and observers, carpeted to muffle footsteps, lined with small windows that looked down into the rooms below. Eveline reached the gallery door. She pressed her ear against the wood. The voices were clear now, sharp, commanding, the organized chaos of a military operation in its final minutes. She eased the door open a crack. The throne room was lit by torches. 40, maybe 50, mounted in the iron brackets along the walls, throwing a harsh orange light that made the marble columns look like pillars of fire. Halvard was there, in full armor, flanked by a dozen of his hand-picked guards. Castaigne was there, standing near the throne with a leather satchel clutched to his chest. Documents, probably, the paperwork of regime change, the bureaucratic infrastructure of a coup. Two other nobles Eveline recognized, Lord Davin and Lady Marchette, minor aristocrats who had attached themselves to Selene's orbit over the past year like pilot fish following a shark, and Selene. She was standing on the raised platform where the throne sat. Not sitting in it, not yet, but standing beside it with one hand resting on the armrest, her fingers curled around the carved stone with the casual possessiveness of a woman touching something that already belonged to her. She was still in the traveling cloak, but her hair was loose now, dark and flowing, and in the torchlight she looked like something from an old story, beautiful and terrible and not entirely human, She was speaking. Her voice carried the clear, practiced authority of someone who had rehearsed this moment until it felt natural. The signal fires will be visible from the North Ridge within the hour. Varen's advance riders will confirm the gate status before the main column moves. Halvard, your men hold the palace perimeter until Varen's forces are inside the walls. Castaigne, the transition documents are ready? Castaigne nodded. Signed and sealed, my lady. The council dissolution, the emergency powers declaration, the arrest warrants for the remaining loyalist commanders. Everything is in order. Good. Celine's hand tightened on the throne. By sunrise, this will be finished. The old regime ends tonight. Everything that comes after belongs to us. Eveline closed the gallery door. She turned to Alaric. He was pressed against the wall beside her, and in the dim light of the corridor she could see his face, and what was on it was something she had not seen in years. The expression he wore before battle, the expression that had made his enemies hesitate and his soldiers charge, the look of a man who had stopped calculating and started committing. There was grief in it, there was shame, but underneath those, holding them up the way bedrock holds up soil, was something that had survived everything Celine had done to him, the fundamental, unkillable core of a man who had once been great and was remembering what greatness felt like. Ready? Eveline whispered. No, he said, but that has never stopped me before. She almost smiled. Almost. She pushed the gallery door open, and they walked out onto the balcony together. The effect was immediate. Every head in the throne room turned upward. Every voice stopped. The silence that fell was absolute. The silence of a room full of people confronting something impossible. Alaric stood at the gallery railing, armored, armed, his face visible in the torchlight. The king, in his own throne room, looking down at the woman who had stolen everything from him. Celine's hand slid off the throne. Her face went through a rapid sequence, shock, calculation, adjustment, before settling into something smooth and controlled. But Eveline saw the moment before the mask clicked into place, the half-second of naked panic that crossed Celine's features like lightning across a dark sky. Alaric? Celine's voice was warm, concerned, the voice of a woman who had been caught in an innocent act and was mildly confused by the interruption. My love, what are you doing? You should be resting. Come down from there. Let me... Be quiet. 2 words. Spoken in the voice Eveline remembered from the wars. Flat, cold, carrying the absolute authority of a man who expected obedience and would accept nothing else. The voice that had commanded armies. The voice that had been missing for 6 months, buried under silk sheets and jasmine oil, and the careful, systematic dismantling of everything he was. Celine stopped talking. The room stopped breathing. Alaric looked at Halvard. Captain, stand down. Order your men to lay down their weapons. Halvard did not move. His eyes went to Celine, seeking instruction, seeking permission. The reflex was automatic and involuntary, and it told Alaric everything he needed to know about where Halvard's loyalty actually lived. I gave you an order, Captain. Halvard's hand went to his sword, not drawing it, resting on it, the posture of a man weighing his options. Your Majesty, Halvard said carefully. Lady Celine has informed us of a security threat. We are acting under emergency protocols to... There is no security threat. There is a coup. You're standing in the middle of it, and you have 5 seconds to decide whether you want to be on the side that wins or the side that dies. The room cracked. Not physically, but Eveline could feel it, the fracture running through the loyalty structure of every person in that room, the fault line between training and self-preservation, between the orders they had been following and the king they had sworn to serve. 3 of Halvard's guards stepped back. They did not drop their weapons, but they moved away from Halvard, creating distance, the instinctive repositioning of men who had just realized they might be standing on the wrong side of a line they could not uncross. Halvard saw it. His face tightened. Celine stepped forward. The mask was back. Calm, authoritative, reasonable. Alaric, she said, whatever Eveline has told you, it is not true. She is desperate. She is a condemned traitor who has... I read the documents, Celine, 4 words, each one a door slamming shut. Celine's expression shifted, the tiniest flicker, a recalculation behind the eyes. The moment a chess player realizes the board has changed and the moves she prepared are useless. I read the troop movements, Alaric continued. I read the intercepted communications. I read the treasury records. And then you walked into my room and told me a delegation was arriving, a large delegation. And I lay there in the dark and I listened to you lie to my face and I let you kiss my forehead and walk away because I wanted to see if you would. I wanted to know if there was anything that would make you stop. His voice broke on the last word. Not dramatically. A small fracture, a crack in stone, the sound of a man who had been holding something together by force of will and had just run out of force. Celine looked at him from the throne room floor. The distance between them was 30 feet of empty air, but the real distance was the space between two versions of reality that could not coexist. The world she had built and the world that was actually there. She made her choice. The mask fell, not gradually, completely. Like a stage curtain dropping at the end of a performance, revealing not another face but the absence of one. A blankness, a void where a person should have been, and in that void something cold and functional and utterly unsentimental. Halvard, she said, the king is compromised. Secure the gallery. Kill the queen. Halvard drew his sword. The guards who had stayed drew theirs. 9 men with steel moved toward the staircase that led to the gallery. But 3 things happened in the next 60 seconds that Celine had not planned for. The first was Roth. The doors to the throne room blew open, and General Roth entered at the head of 200 soldiers. His loyalists from the capital garrison, armed and positioned outside the palace since midnight, waiting for the signal that Eveline had arranged. A single torch dropped from the gallery window. Roth saw it fall and moved. The second was Polk. 16 night watchmen dropped from the service corridors above the throne room, ropes, crossbows. The efficient violence of men who knew every rafter and beam in this ceiling because they had patrolled above it for decades. 4 of Halvard's guards went down before they understood what was happening, crossbow bolts punching through gaps in armor with the surgical precision of men who had practiced this shot in the dark. The third was Kess. In the streets outside the palace, 50 dock workers and fishermen hit Halvard's perimeter guards from 3 sides simultaneously, wielding hammers and boat hooks, and the desperate, terrifying ferocity of civilians who had decided they had nothing left to lose. The throne room became a battle. Close quarters, steel on steel. The sound was deafening, the clash and ring of weapons, boots on marble, shouting, the wet impact of blade meeting flesh. Roth's soldiers overwhelmed Halvard's remaining guards in minutes, but those minutes were chaos, pure and uncontrollable, the kind of violence that does not distinguish between sides and consumes everything in its radius. Halvard fought through to the staircase. He made it halfway up before Alaric met him coming down. The king and the captain collided on the narrow stairs, and what followed was not a duel, it was a brawl. 2 armored men in a space too tight for technique, smashing at each other with pommel strikes and elbow blows, and the raw, artless savagery of men fighting for their lives at arm's length. Alaric took a cut across his left arm, shallow, bloody, the kind of wound that does not stop you but reminds you that you can be stopped. He drove his shoulder into Halvard's chest and shoved him back. Halvard stumbled. Alaric's sword found the gap between breastplate and gorget, and the captain fell on the stairs and did not get up. Alaric stood over the body. Blood ran down his arm and dripped from his gauntlet onto the marble. He was breathing hard, great heaving gulps of air that fogged in the cold of the stairwell. His face was splattered with red that was not his own, and his eyes had the glassy, unfocused intensity of a man in the grip of combat adrenaline, a state where the body takes over and the mind just watches. He looked down at Halvard, the man he had promoted, the man he had trusted to guard his family. Another piece of his failure, lying broken on the stairs. He stepped over the body and climbed to the gallery. Below, Roth was securing the throne room. Castaigne had surrendered immediately, dropping to his knees with his hands raised and his leather satchel of transition documents scattered across the floor, the bureaucrat's survival instinct overriding every other consideration. Lord Davin and Lady Marchette had been seized by Polk's watchmen and were being held against the far wall with crossbows leveled at their chests. Celine was gone. Eveline saw the empty space where Celine had been standing and felt something cold drop through her stomach. She scanned the throne room from the gallery, torchlight and chaos, soldiers and bodies and the settling dust of a fight that had lasted less than 5 minutes but had changed the geometry of everything. "Roth," she called down. "Where is she?" Roth turned. His face was cut, a shallow gash across his cheekbone that was bleeding freely. and his sword was red to the hilt. She went through the side passage, toward the east wing. Two of my men are pursuing, the east wing, the passage that led to the palace's eastern gate, the gate that opened toward the north road, the road that led to Varen's army. Evelyn did not think. She moved. Down the gallery stairs across the throne room floor, stepping over a fallen guard, her boots sliding in blood, through the side passage, into the corridor that connected the throne room to the east wing. She ran. The corridor was long and straight and lit by wall-mounted torches that turned the stone walls amber. Her wet boots pounded the floor. The blade in her hand caught the light with each stride. She could hear footsteps ahead, running footsteps, lighter than a soldier's, the rapid percussion of a woman in a traveling cloak moving at full speed. She rounded the corner and saw her. Celine was at the eastern gate. The gate was half open. She had reached it before Roth's men had found the guards already neutralized by someone, one of her own contingency plans, a backup route for exactly this scenario, and she was pushing through the gap, squeezing her body through the narrow opening into the courtyard beyond. Evelyn closed the distance. 30 feet, 20, 15. Celine was through the gate, but the courtyard beyond was not empty. Kess's people had circled the palace, cutting off the exits, and when Celine emerged into the open air, she found herself facing a half-circle of armed dock workers with torches and hammers, and the expression of people who had been told that the woman in front of them was the reason their city was about to burn. Celine stopped. She turned. Evelyn was coming through the gate behind her, blade drawn, breathing hard. They faced each other in the courtyard. Torchlight from the dock workers' hands threw their shadows in long, distorted shapes across the cobblestones. The sky above was beginning to lighten, the first pale edge of dawn pushing up behind the eastern ridge. Celine looked at the armed civilians surrounding her. She looked at Evelyn. And then she did something Evelyn did not expect. She laughed, not the warm practice laugh she used in court. A different sound. Hard, bright, genuine. The laugh of a woman who had been playing a role for so long that dropping it felt like relief. "You crawled through a sewer," Celine said. She was breathing hard, but her voice was steady. "You actually crawled through a sewer to save a man who threw you away. I spent months trying to understand you, Evelyn. Months trying to find the weakness, the pride, the vanity, the breaking point. Every person has one. Every person has the thing that, if you press it hard enough, collapses the entire structure. But you," Celine shook her head, "you just kept standing. I removed your title. You stood. I took your husband. You stood. I took your allies, your staff, your reputation, your freedom. And you stood. And now here you are, wet and dirty and armed with a knife, and you are still standing, and I, honest to everything in this world, cannot figure out why." Evelyn's grip on the blade was steady. Her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears, but her hand was still, the way it always was when the stakes passed beyond fear into the territory where the body simply does what it was built to do. "Because you made a mistake," Evelyn said. "You studied everyone in that palace. You learned what they wanted, what they feared, what they would sell, and what they would protect. You were brilliant at it, the best I have ever seen. But you studied what people had. You never studied what people are. You took everything from me and then expected me to stop. But people who have nothing left do not stop, Celine. They become the most dangerous thing in any room. You should have killed me when you had the chance." Celine's eyes narrowed. For a moment, just a moment, something that might have been respect flickered across her face. "I considered it," she said. "Castaigne suggested it twice. But a dead queen creates a martyr. A disgraced queen creates a lesson. I chose the lesson. And now the lesson is standing in front of you with a blade." Celine reached inside her cloak. The dock workers tensed. Kess stepped forward with her hammer raised. But what Celine pulled out was not a weapon. It was a small glass vial, stoppered with wax, containing a clear liquid that caught the torchlight like a captured star. Evelyn recognized it. Not the specific vial, but the type. She had seen them during the wars in the hands of assassins and desperate commanders and prisoners who preferred their own terms to the enemy's. Poison. Fast-acting. 15 seconds from swallow to collapse. 30 seconds to death. Celine held the vial between her thumb and forefinger. She looked at Evelyn with an expression that had finally, completely, abandoned performance. No mask, no calculation, no warmth or coldness or anything designed to produce an effect. Just a woman standing in a courtyard at dawn, holding her own death in her hand, deciding. "I will not give you the satisfaction of a trial," Celine said. "I will not stand in a cage while your people spit at me and your husband pretends he was not complicit. I played the game. I played it better than anyone in this kingdom has ever played it. I would have won. The fact that I did not win does not mean I was wrong. Nobody moved. The torches crackled. The dawn was spreading, pink and gold, indifferent to everything happening beneath it. Celine looked at Eveline one last time. "Take care of him," she said. "He is weaker than he looks." She broke the wax seal and drank. It took 23 seconds. Eveline counted them. Not out of cruelty, but out of the strange, involuntary precision that the mind defaults to in moments of extremity, when there is nothing to do but witness, and the brain clings to numbers because numbers are the last thing that makes sense. Celine fell, first to her knees, then forward, her hands catching herself on the cobblestones, her dark hair spilling across the ground. Her body shuddered once, twice. Then it was still. The courtyard was quiet. The dock workers stood in their half-circle, torches raised, watching a woman die in the first light of morning. Kess lowered her hammer slowly, as if the weight of it had suddenly doubled. Eveline sheathed her blade. She stood over Celine's body and looked down at the face that had stolen her husband, her home, her name. In death, stripped of animation and intent, the face was just a face. Young, beautiful, empty. The features of a weapon that had been discharged and discarded. She felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not even relief. Just a vast, echoing blankness where emotion should have been. The numbness that follows a sustained period of survival when the threat disappears and the body does not know how to stop fighting. She turned away. Roth found her in the courtyard 10 minutes later. The sun was up. The battle was over. Inside the palace, Halvard's remaining loyalists had surrendered when word reached them that the captain was dead and the king was in command. In the streets, Kess's fighters and Polk's watchmen were securing the perimeter and closing every gate with iron bars and chains. "The throne room is secure," Roth said. "Castaigne is in custody. The arrest warrants Celine prepared have been seized, and I have sent riders to the north gate. The garrison there is holding, and they have confirmed visual contact with Varen's advance scouts." "How far?" 3 miles, maybe less. They will see the gates closed. They will see soldiers on the walls. And they will realize that whatever they were expecting to find is not here. Eveline nodded. "Send a herald, under the flag of parley. Tell Varen's commanders that the woman who promised them open gates is dead on the cobblestones, and the army they were counting on is standing behind walls they cannot breach. Tell them they have 12 hours to begin their withdrawal through the northern passes before Commander Aldrich closes those passes behind them." Roth looked at her. "Aldrich is in position?" "Aldrich received my message 8 days ago. He has moved 3,000 cavalry to the mountain exits. Varen's army marches north, or it starves. There is no third option." Roth almost smiled. The cut on his cheek was crusted with dried blood, and the smile pulled at it painfully, but he smiled anyway. "You planned that 8 days ago." "I planned it the night I crawled out of a sewer and stood in an abandoned tannery with maps on the floor and nothing but the clothes on my back. I planned it because I had to, because nobody else was going to." He nodded. Then he went to execute her orders, and Eveline stood in the courtyard while the sun climbed higher, and the city woke up around her, and the sound of iron gates being chained shut echoed through the streets like a heartbeat. Varen's army withdrew before noon. The herald's message had been simple and brutal, and the warlord's commanders, confronted with sealed gates and the news of Celine's death, made the calculation that professional soldiers make when the odds shift from favorable to suicidal. They turned north. Aldrich's cavalry shadowed them through the passes, ensuring they kept moving, ensuring the retreat did not become a regrouping. By sunset, the immediate crisis was over, but the wreckage it left behind was not. Alaric found Eveline in the great hall that evening. She was sitting on the steps below the throne. Not on it, never on it, with her back against the cold stone and her hands resting on her knees. She had not changed out of her filthy clothes. She had not eaten. She had spent the day issuing orders, organizing defenses, coordinating with Roth and Sarah and Kess and the dozens of people whose names she had learned in 10 impossible days. She had done everything that needed doing, and now everything was done. and she was sitting on the steps in the empty hall because her legs had simply stopped carrying her and there was nowhere else to go. Alaric walked the length of the hall alone. His footsteps echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He was still in his armor. The cut on his arm had been bandaged, but blood had seeped through the linen, a dark stain spreading slowly like a map of something lost. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The hall was empty. The torches were burning low. Outside, the city was quiet with the particular exhaustion that follows a day when everything nearly ended. "I do not know how to say what I need to say," Alaric said. "Then do not say it." "I have to." "You do not." Evelyn's voice was quiet, tired beyond measure, but not bitter. The bitterness had burned out somewhere between the sewer and the courtyard, consumed by a fire that had been feeding on it for months and had finally run out of fuel. "You do not have to say anything, Alaric. I know what you did. You know what you did. Words do not fix it. Apologies do not rebuild what was demolished. The only thing that matters now is what happens next." Alaric sat on the step below her. The armor scraped against the stone. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his head bowed, and he looked nothing like a king. He looked like an exhausted, injured, middle-aged man sitting in a room too big for one person, carrying a weight he did not know how to put down. "She was never real," he said. "None of it was real. Every word, every touch, every moment, manufactured. And I chose it. I chose the lie over the truth because the lie felt better and the truth felt like work. You were right, and I punished you for being right because being right meant I was wrong, and I could not tolerate that. I could not tolerate being wrong about something that fundamental." He looked at his hands. The gauntlets were off. His hands were scraped and swollen from the fight on the stairs. "What does that make me?" he asked. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She looked at the empty hall, the throne, the marble columns, the torches guttering in their brackets, the skeleton of an empire that had almost died. "Human," she said. "It makes you human. Not good, not noble, not the hero of some story where the king learns his lesson and everything goes back to the way it was. Just human, flawed and foolish and capable of terrible judgment, like every person who has ever lived. The question is not what you are. The question is what you do with what you know now." He did not answer. She did not expect him to. Some questions are not designed to be answered in the moment they are asked. They are designed to live inside a person, working slowly, the way water works on stone, not breaking it, but reshaping it, year by year, until the thing that remains is different from the thing that was. They sat together on the steps of the throne room while the torches burned down and the night settled over the palace like a hand closing gently over a wound. They did not touch. They did not make promises. They sat with the full weight of everything that had happened between them, the love, the betrayal, the destruction, the rescue, and they let it be what it was, messy, unresolved, real.